Readers are welcome to leave comments in the comments section.
The blue laser array didn't just illuminate the clean room, it sliced through the heavy, two-morning silence of the advanced physics annex like a scalpel. Elena adjusted her glasses, the thin, matte black frames that usually kept the world at a safe, mathematical distance, and stared at the fluctuating thermal readings on her monitor. She was exactly 3 lines of code away from proving her quantum coherence theory, and exactly 1 cup of coffee away from a total nervous breakdown. The MIT grant deadline was at sunrise, and in the quiet sanctuary of the basement lab, she could hear the precise, rhythmic hum of the liquid helium pumps. It was a perfect, predictable system. Until the heavy glass door clicked open, and Jordan stepped inside, smelling of rain, dark roast espresso, and immediate, unadulterated chaos. "You're violating the cardinal rule of thermodynamics, Miller," Jordan said, her voice a low, gravelly hum that vibrated straight down Elena's spine. Jordan didn't walk into a room, she drifted into it with an infuriating, casual confidence, her leather jacket slung over one shoulder and her untamed dark hair still damp from the midnight storm outside. "You're trying to force order onto a system that desperately wants to decay." Elena didn't look up from her screen, though her fingers froze over the mechanical keyboard. "I am trying to secure a $100,000 research fellowship, Jordan. Some of us don't have the luxury of relying on pure charisma and experimental luck." Ouch. Jordan stepped closer, the soft leather of her jacket brushing against the back of Elena's ergonomic chair. She leaned down, bracing one hand on the edge of the desk. The sudden proximity brought the scent of cedarwood and cold air right into Elena's personal space. Luck is just statistical probability favoring the bold. And right now, your probability looks a little stuck. Elena finally turned her head. Her nose was barely 3 inches from Jordan's jawline. Up close, she could see the faint, amber flecks in Jordan's eyes that were currently locked onto Elena's lips before darting back up to meet her gaze. The air between them instantly grew thick, heavy with the kind of friction that no textbook could adequately quantify. "I'm not stuck," Elena muttered, her voice dropping an octave as she pointedly looked back at the monitor. "The cryocooler is experiencing a minor thermal spike. It's a calibration issue. Let me look." Before Elena could protest, Jordan slid into the narrow space between the desk and the chair, her hip pressing firmly against Elena's thigh. The fabric of Jordan's ripped jeans was rough against Elena's smooth trousers, a sharp, physical jolt that made Elena's breath hitch. Jordan reached across Elena's body to grab the mouse, her forearm brushing over Elena's lap. Elena caught her breath, her eyes widening behind her lenses. She could feel the radiant heat radiating off Jordan's skin, a stark contrast to the chilled, climate-controlled laboratory. "Jordan, there is a very specific protocol for." "Protocol is for people who don't know how to handle the hardware," Jordan murmured, her eyes fixed on the data streams, though she hadn't moved her hip away. In fact, she leaned in slightly deeper, her shoulder pinning Elena gently against the backrest. "Look at the primary manifold. The pressure is building because your coolant valve is locked. You're suffocating the system, Elena. You need to let it breathe." The double meaning hung in the air, thick and deliberate. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, erratic rhythm that defied all logic. She looked at Jordan's profile, the sharp line of her nose, the slight, knowing smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. Jordan knew exactly what she was doing. She was a master of manipulation, both of subatomic particles and human reactions. "Fine," Elena whispered, her voice trembling just enough for Jordan's smirk to widen. "Fix it then." "Happy to." Jordan's fingers danced across the keyboard, her knuckles occasionally skimming the back of Elena's hand. Every touch felt like a deliberate spark, a minivolt of static electricity that left Elena's skin tingling. But it's going to require a manual reset on the physical valve under the console. Which means... Jordan finally looked away from the screen, her eyes dropping to the cramped, dark space beneath the metal workbench. We're going to have to get creative. Elena looked down at the narrow space. It was barely wide enough for one person, let alone two grown women whose tension had been building since the first day of the fall semester. I can do it myself. You don't know the torque sequence for the upgraded valves, Jordan countered easily, already dropping to her knees on the polished concrete floor. She looked up at Elena through her lashes, an expression that was dangerously playful. Come on, Miller. Don't be a coward. It's just a little engineering. Reluctantly, Elena slid off her chair and knelt down beside her. The space beneath the desk was shielded from the bright lab lights, creating an accidental, intimate cocoon. They were nose to nose now, knees overlapping, the heat between them instantly multiplying in the confined space. Elena's glasses slid down the bridge of her nose from the humidity, and before she could raise her hand, Jordan's fingers were there, gently pushing the frames back into place. Jordan's fingertips lingered on Elena's temple for a fraction of a second too long. Her touch was surprisingly gentle, a soft contrast to her loud personality. Better? Jordan asked, her voice barely a whisper over the roar of the machinery above them. The valve, Jordan, Elena reminded her, though her own voice sounded breathless, lacking any real authority. Jordan smiled, a slow, mesmerizing expression that entirely disarmed Elena. She reached into the darkness, her hand finding the heavy steel valve. All right. Hold this flashlight for me. And stay close. If this pipe blows, we both get covered in liquid nitrogen, and I'm wearing my favorite jacket. Elena took the small aluminum flashlight, her fingers wrapping over Jordan's to transfer the tool. For a heartbeat, neither of them let go. They stayed frozen, gripping the flashlight together, their faces so close Elena could feel the warm puff of Jordan's breath against her lips. The temptation to lean forward, to close the remaining 2 inches of distance and erase the months of academic rivalry and hidden glances, was overwhelming. Jordan's gaze dropped to Elena's mouth again, her pupils dilated in the dim light. She didn't move away. Instead, she tilted her head, her shoulder shifting against Elena's, inviting the contact. Elena, Jordan murmured, her tone losing its teasing edge, replaced by something raw and genuine. You're radiating a lot of heat for someone who works in cryogenics. It's the ambient temperature, Elena lied, her eyes locked onto Jordan's. Right. Ambient temperature, Jordan echoed softly. She slowly pulled her hand away from the flashlight, though her arm remained resting against Elena's waist, a steady, warm weight that anchored them together in the dark. With her free hand, she gripped the wrench, her muscles tightening as she pulled against the stubborn valve. Hold the light steady. Right there. Elena exerted every ounce of her formidable willpower to keep the beam focused on the copper fitting, even as Jordan's shoulder worked against hers, the physical effort causing Jordan to lean heavily into Elena's chest. The proximity was intoxicating. Elena could hear the rush of blood in her own ears, a frantic counterpoint to the slow, heavy thudding of Jordan's heart just inches away. With a sharp crack, the valve gave way. A hiss of white vapor escaped the pipe, swirling around their ankles like low-lying fog. Got it, Jordan breathed, but she didn't move to climb out. She stayed right there, pinned against Elena, her eyes searching Elena's face behind the lenses of her glasses. The danger had passed, the machine was stabilizing above them, but the real reaction was just beginning. See? No explosion. Just perfect alignment. Elena looked at her, the final remnants of her professional composure melting away under Jordan's intense, focused gaze. Is that what this is? Alignment? Call it whatever you want, Jordan whispered, her face moving a fraction closer, her lips brushing the very edge of Elena's jawline as she spoke. But we both know the data doesn't lie. The mist from the coolant line began to dissipate, leaving behind a cold, sterile air that did nothing to lower the temperature between them. Elena remained frozen against the underside of the heavy mahogany desk, the sharp edges of the metal frame digging into her back, yet she felt nothing but the firm, warm pressure of Jordan's shoulder against her own. Jordan had stopped working on the valve minutes ago, the wrench forgotten on the concrete floor, her hand now resting casually on Elena's knee. The system is stable, Elena whispered, her voice sounding foreign to her own ears. It was an objective, scientific fact, but in the intimate darkness of the workbench, it sounded more like a surrender. Jordan didn't pull back. If anything, she shifted, her knee sliding between Elena's, creating a seamless, electric contact that traveled straight to Elena's core. Systems are always stable when you apply the right amount of pressure at the right point, Jordan murmured, her voice a low, melodic purr. She reached up, her thumb brushing a stray lock of hair behind Elena's ear, lingering there as her fingers traced the line of Elena's jaw. But you, Elena, you're a much more complex variable to calculate. Elena felt her pulse drumming against her neck, a frantic rhythm that felt entirely at odds with the controlled, precise environment of the lab. She wanted to pull away, to maintain the barrier of professional respectability that had defined their relationship for 3 years, but her body had other plans. Every instinct she possessed, every logical pathway in her brain, was short-circuiting under Jordan's gaze. You like to think you're in control, Elena countered, though she leaned into the touch, her eyelids fluttering shut for a brief, dangerous second. But you're just creating a feedback loop. A chaotic one. Maybe I like the chaos, Jordan replied, her thumb dipping down to graze Elena's bottom lip. The contact was electric, a sudden jolt that made Elena gasp. Maybe I've been waiting for a reason to break the protocol. The silence that followed was suffocating, yet filled with an intensity so palpable it felt like the air was ionized. Elena opened her eyes, looking directly into Jordan's. There was no trace of the usual sarcasm, no hint of the playful bravado Jordan wore like armor. There was only a raw, terrifying hunger that mirrored the one Elena had been hiding for months. Jordan moved then, slow and deliberate, giving Elena every opportunity to stop her. She leaned forward, the scent of espresso and ozone enveloping Elena completely. When their lips finally met, it wasn't the tentative, hesitant kiss Elena had imagined in her quietest moments. It was an investigation, a collision of two forces that had been orbiting one another for too long. Jordan's lips were soft but demanding, a stark contrast to the sharp intellect Elena knew resided behind them. She tasted like the coffee she lived on, mixed with something uniquely, intoxicatingly her. Elena let out a soft, sharp exhale, her hands finding purchase in the fabric of Jordan's jacket, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. The kiss deepened, shifting from a tentative exploration into something hungrier, something desperate. It was the physical manifestation of every late-night glance across the library, every sharp-tongued debate in the lecture hall, every moment of repressed longing that had simmered just beneath the surface of their academic rivalry. Jordan's hand moved from Elena's knee to the back of her neck, her fingers tangling in Elena's hair, keeping her anchored as she tilted her head to deepen the angle. Elena felt her glasses sliding precariously down her nose, a small, grounding detail that suddenly felt trivial. She reached up with one hand, pushing the frames back up, her fingers brushing against Jordan's cheek. Jordan hummed into her mouth, a sound of pure, unadulterated pleasure that sent a fresh wave of heat through Elena's veins. For a few golden, suspended moments, the rest of the world ceased to exist. There were no grants, no deadlines, no looming exams, and no academic hierarchies. There was only the feeling of Jordan's skin against her own, the frantic racing of their hearts, and the undeniable magnetism that had pulled them together against all odds. But as quickly as the moment had sparked, the reality of their surroundings began to intrude. A loud, jarring beep emanated from the server rack behind them, the automated alert for a system heartbeat, a reminder that they were still in the middle of a high-stakes research environment. The sound was like a bucket of ice water. Elena pulled back, her breath coming in ragged, uneven gasps. Her lips were swollen, her heart hammered against her ribs, and her brain was spinning. She looked at Jordan, whose eyes were darkened, her pupils blown wide, and whose own breathing was just as uneven. Jordan looked at her for a long beat, her hand finally falling away from Elena's neck. A slow, lopsided grin, the signature Jordan grin that usually signaled a retort or a challenge, slowly returned to her face, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well," Jordan whispered, her voice raspy. That was a significant data point. Elena flushed, the heat rising to her cheeks as she scrambled to adjust her sweater and regain some semblance of dignity. She reached for her glasses, which had finally slipped off, and pressed them back onto her face, trying to view the world through a more objective lens. "That was a massive disruption to our workflow, Jordan." "Was it?" Jordan asked, arching an eyebrow. She stood up, reaching down to offer Elena a hand. Her palm was warm, and as Elena took it, she felt a lingering jolt of electricity that made her heart skip a beat. "Because from where I'm standing, the system seems perfectly optimized now." Elena didn't take the hand immediately. She stayed on her knees for a second longer, trying to reconcile the woman she had just kissed with the academic rival she had sparred with all semester. "We need to finish the calibration. If the grant committee sees these fluctuations..." "The committee," Jordan interrupted, her tone softening, "can wait until morning. We have all night." She stood tall, looming slightly over Elena, a figure of chaotic, brilliant, and completely irresistible energy. "Besides, I think we both know that you weren't actually trying to finish that code. You were just waiting for a reason to stop." Elena stood up, smoothing her clothes and trying to ignore the way her knees felt like liquid. She avoided Jordan's gaze, turning back to the glowing monitors. The screen was still filled with lines of data, a reminder of the life she was supposed to be leading, a life of order, logic, and predictability. But when she looked at the reflection in the glass, Jordan standing behind her, watching her with a look of possessive, quiet intensity, she knew that things had fundamentally shifted. "Go home, Jordan," Elena said, though her voice lacked any real conviction. "I have to finish this alone." Jordan laughed, a light, airy sound that didn't belong in the cold, clinical basement of the physics building. She walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. She looked back at Elena, her expression a mix of challenge and something far more tender. "I'm not going anywhere, Elena," Jordan said, her voice dropping into a register that made Elena's stomach flip. "I'll be right outside in the break room. If you find yourself in need of further calibration, you know where to find me." With that, Jordan disappeared out into the quiet hallway, leaving the heavy door to click shut behind her. Elena stood in the silence of the lab, her heart still racing, her lips still tingling from the phantom sensation of Jordan's kiss. She looked at the screen, at the code that had once been the most important thing in her world, and realized it had lost its luster. The numbers hadn't changed, the theory remained the same, but the motivation, the drive to prove herself, felt different. It wasn't about the grant anymore. It was about the way Jordan had looked at her, the way she had pushed her, and the way she had made her feel that she was not just a mind, but a person capable of being desired. Elena sat back down in her chair, the leather still warm from Jordan's presence. She stared at the screen, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about the way Jordan's hand had felt against her waist, the way her eyes had tracked every movement, and the promise that was waiting for her just outside the lab doors. She turned back to the console, her fingers poised over the keyboard. She wasn't going to quit. She was going to finish the project. But she was going to do it differently. She was going to do it for herself, for the woman who had just ignited a fire inside her, and for the promise of whatever would happen when the sun finally came up. The lab remained quiet, the hum of the pumps providing a steady, rhythmic background to her thoughts. Elena worked, but her focus was no longer on the physics of the quantum world. It was on the physics of the person in the break room, the one who had just rewritten the rules of her entire life with a single, perfectly timed, and entirely unscientific kiss. She wasn't just a theorist anymore. She was a participant. And for the first time in her life, she realized that some variables weren't meant to be solved, they were meant to be experienced. The hours stretched on, the night deepening into the early, pre-dawn grey. Elena poured herself into the work, the code flowing with a newfound efficiency. Every time she reached a difficult section, she thought of Jordan's smirk, her encouragement, and the way she had looked at her in the dark. It spurred her on, providing a fuel more potent than any espresso. She was building something, but it wasn't just a research paper. She was building a foundation for something else, something she didn't yet have a name for. Something that was, in all its complexity, beautiful. When the first light of dawn finally filtered through the high, narrow windows of the lab, painting the room in soft, golden hues, Elena finally hit the save button. She leaned back, exhausted but exhilarated. She had done it. She had completed the project, and more importantly, she had survived the night. She stood up, her muscles stiff, and walked toward the break room. Her heart was beating a steady, anticipatory rhythm. She didn't know what to expect, if Jordan would still be there, if she would still have that same smirk, or if the events of the night would be treated with the distance of morning light. But as she pushed open the break room door, she saw Jordan sitting at the small, laminate table, a half-empty cup of coffee in her hand, her eyes closed, her head resting on her hand. She looked soft, vulnerable, and completely at peace. Elena hesitated in the doorway, a surge of affection washing over her. She realized, with sudden, crystal-clear clarity, that this was where she wanted to be. Not just in this room, or in this building, but with this person. Jordan opened her eyes, blinking against the morning light. She saw Elena, and a slow, genuine smile spread across her face, a smile that held no sarcasm, no calculation, just a pure, simple warmth. "You're done," Jordan said, not as a question, but as a statement. "I'm done," Elena replied, moving into the room. "And?" Jordan asked, standing up and closing the distance between them. "And," Elena said, stopping just inches from her, "I think we need to talk about our next experiment." Jordan chuckled, the sound vibrating in the small, quiet room. I was hoping you'd say that. She reached out, her hand finding Elena's, their fingers interlacing. The contact was solid, grounded, and real. The chaos of the night before had settled into something promising, a new, undiscovered space for them to explore. As they walked out of the break room together, the early morning air crisp and fresh against their faces, Elena realized that the experiment was far from over. In fact, she suspected it was only just beginning, and for the first time in her life, the unpredictability of it all didn't scare her. It felt like exactly what she had been missing. The campus was just starting to wake up, the birds chirping in the trees, the first students beginning to filter toward the dining hall. The world was beginning to turn in its usual, predictable way, but for Elena and Jordan, everything had changed. They were moving forward, together, into the unknown, ready to write the next chapter of their own, highly complex, and perfectly beautiful story. The morning light caught the edges of Elena's glasses, refracting a rainbow of color across Jordan's face. Jordan looked at her, her eyes shining with an intensity that made Elena's heart soar. "So," Jordan said, her voice teasing but soft, "where to now?" Elena looked at her, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth, a smile she hadn't known she was capable of wearing. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'm looking forward to finding out." And with that, they walked away from the physics building, away from the lab, and toward the rest of their lives. The story, they both knew, was just starting, and it was going to be a masterpiece of friction, attraction, and, ultimately, a perfect, logical, and deeply human connection. The sun was a jarring presence. After 18 hours in the subterranean, climate-controlled silence of the Advanced Physics Annex, the morning light felt intrusive. It hit the campus quad with a relentless, high-contrast clarity that exposed everything. It didn't care about the exhaustion behind Elena's eyelids or the adrenaline that still hummed beneath her skin like a live wire. It only cared about revealing the world as it was. Elena walked with her shoulders braced, her wool coat pulled tight. Beside her, Jordan moved with an irritating, predatory ease. She didn't look like she had spent the entire night fighting thermal coefficients and quantum decay. She looked like she had just stepped off a motorcycle, her leather jacket catching the early light, her dark hair a wild halo that made Elena's own neat ponytail feel like a badge of failure. "The resolution is too high," Elena murmured, her voice thin. She kept her gaze fixed on the brick path, counting the gaps between the mortar. Jordan chuckled, the sound cutting through the quiet morning like a blade. "It's high contrast, Miller. It forces you to see the details. No shadows to hide in. No flickering monitors to distract you." Elena glanced at her. Jordan was watching the students streaming past them toward the dining hall, fresh-faced undergraduates with heavy backpacks and, presumably, sleep-deprived brains. Jordan didn't look tired, she looked electrified, as if the dawn were a power source. "Clarity is a liability," Elena countered, clutching her messenger bag to her side. "Sometimes, the lack of focus is a protective layer. It allows for fluidity." Fluidity. Jordan bumped her shoulder against Elena's, a deliberate, grounding contact that made Elena's breath hitch. "You're talking about wanting to be blurry. You spent all night building a precise, perfect, and undeniably brilliant simulation. The variable has changed, Elena. We aren't in the lab anymore. I am aware of our geographic coordinates, Jordan." "Good. Because I'm starving." Jordan steered them toward the glass-fronted entrance of the Student Union Cafe. "If I don't get sugar and caffeine into my system in the next 5 minutes, I might actually decay into a pile of atoms right here on the sidewalk. Think of the paperwork for the groundskeeping staff. Inside, the cafe was a cacophony of steaming milk, the aggressive clacking of laptop keys, and the desperate murmur of early morning academic ambition. It was a space Elena usually occupied with a single, sharp focus, a black coffee, a corner seat, and 3 hours of undisturbed work. Today, however, the presence of Jordan turned the space into a completely different equation. They waited in line. The air was thick with the scent of roasted beans and burnt toast. Jordan leaned back against the counter, her presence filling the space with a sudden, localized gravity. She was watching Elena, her amber eyes tracking every movement, the way Elena fiddled with the strap of her bag, the way she checked her watch, the way she avoided looking at the menu. "Stop thinking," Jordan murmured, leaning in so close that Elena could feel the warmth of her chest against her shoulder. It was a calculated move, one that bypassed Elena's professional shields entirely. "Just order the coffee. Then we'll find a table." "I don't know what I want," Elena admitted, a rare moment of vulnerability that felt like a crack in her composure. "I do." Jordan ordered for both of them before Elena could formulate a counter-argument, 2 large cold brews, one with oat milk for Elena, black for herself, and a pair of toasted bagels. They found a small, circular table near the window. As they sat, the reality of the morning settled over them. The adrenaline of the grant submission had crested, and the exhaustion was beginning to bleed into their movements. "So," Jordan said, taking a long, slow sip of her coffee. She rested her elbows on the table, her hands framing her face, her eyes fixed on Elena. "What happens now?" "We've got 3 months before the review board returns a verdict. The project is out of our hands." Elena watched the steam rising from her cup. "We wait. We focus on the current curriculum. We do our work." "You make doing the work sound like a prison sentence." Jordan reached across the table, not to touch her, but to tap her fingers rhythmically against the laminate surface. "You've spent years building this perfect, sterile existence, Elena. You've curated your life like a museum exhibit. But museums are quiet. They don't have life." "I have a life," Elena defended, her voice gaining a defensive edge. "I have my research. I have my responsibilities." "You have a thesis statement," Jordan countered, her voice softening. "But you don't have a narrative. Not one that isn't dictated by the syllabus." Elena looked at her. The accusation stung because it was fundamentally accurate. She had been living by a set of parameters designed by everyone except herself. Until Jordan. "And you?" Elena asked, her own curiosity finally overriding her restraint. "What is your narrative? Aside from disrupting mine?" Jordan's expression shifted, the playful smirk softening into something more contemplative. She traced the rim of her coffee cup. "My narrative? It's a bit of a disaster, honestly. I don't plan. I don't map out the trajectory. I just react to the stimuli. I find things that interest me, problems that need solving, systems that need friction, and I engage. I move until I find the next point of contact." She looked up at Elena, her gaze steady and unwavering. "And lately, the only thing that's really interested me is the way you hold yourself when you think nobody's watching. You're like a spring, Elena. Wound so tight, so full of potential energy. I've just been curious about what would happen if you were allowed to release it." Elena's heart skipped a beat, a physical reaction she couldn't account for. The coffee shop, the chatter, the glaring daylight, all of it faded into the background. She felt exposed, seen in a way that terrified and thrilled her. "You're making this sound like a physics experiment," Elena whispered, her hands trembling slightly as she lifted her coffee. "Everything is a physics experiment," Jordan replied, her voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur. "Especially this." Just then, a voice interrupted the moment. "Miller. Vance. I see you two are still at it." Elena jolted, nearly spilling her drink. Dr. Aries, their department chair, was standing at the table, a stack of folders under his arm and a perplexed expression on his face. He was an older man, a man of rigid schedules and absolute expectations. Seeing the two of them, disheveled, sharing a table at 8:15 a.m., was clearly a puzzle he wasn't prepared to solve. Dr. Aries, Elena said, standing up reflexively, her professional persona snapping back into place like a rubber band. "Good morning." Jordan didn't move, merely leaning back in her chair with a casual, lazy grace that bordered on insolence. "Morning, Dr. Aries. Just reviewing the, thermal coefficients of our morning beverage." The professor blinked, his brow furrowing. "I see. Well, I hope you aren't wasting time. The MIT portal has been open for all of 2 hours, and I expect you both to be in the lecture hall by 9. "Of course," Elena said, her voice tight. "We're heading there now." "Excellent. Keep that momentum. I'd hate to see such promising work stall." With a stiff nod, he turned and marched toward the barista counter. The silence that followed was heavy. Elena slowly sat back down, her shoulders sagging. She felt the sudden, crushing weight of reality, the academic expectations, the scrutiny, the rules that governed their every move. "Well," Jordan said, her voice remarkably dry. "He's a fun killer, isn't he?" "He's the department chair, Jordan," Elena hissed, leaning over the table. "We have to be careful. We can't just act like." "Like what?" Jordan asked, though her eyes were gleaming with amusement. "Like we're two people who spent the last 12 hours working in perfect harmony, both physically and intellectually." "Like we're a liability," Elena said, lowering her voice. "If this gets out, if people think we're collaborating too closely." "Too closely?" Jordan tilted her head. "Is that what we are? Too close?" Elena opened her mouth to argue, to deny it, to recite the standard operating procedures of a graduate student. But the words died in her throat. She looked at Jordan, the messy hair, the leather jacket, the sharp, intelligent, chaotic life force that was currently sitting 3 feet away, and realized that the "too close" was exactly what she wanted. "You're impossible," Elena said, though there was no heat in the words. "And you're, at long last, getting interesting," Jordan shot back. She stood up, finished with her coffee, and gestured toward the door. "Lecture hall in 40 minutes. We have time for a walk." "A walk where?" "To the quad. To the trees. Somewhere without a department chair or a laser-lined cooling system." Jordan reached down, her hand finding Elena's again, a firm, grounding pressure. Elena hesitated for a split second, weighing the consequences, the social cost, the professional risk. Then, she looked at their joined hands. The contrast of her pale, slender fingers against Jordan's calloused, warm palm was a testament to the fact that they were different, vastly, fundamentally different. And yet, the connection was undeniable. She stood up, letting Jordan pull her toward the exit. The campus was a blur of movement as they walked, But Elena didn't see the students, the buildings, or the paths. She only saw the way Jordan moved beside her, the way she made room for her in the crowded space, the way she didn't care who saw them together. They reached a secluded bench near the campus library, shielded from the main thoroughfare by a thick row of oak trees. It was quiet here, a pocket of stillness in the morning chaos. Jordan didn't sit down. She turned to face Elena, her expression changing. The teasing, the sarcasm, the bravado, it all fell away, leaving behind a raw, intense focus that made Elena's breath catch in her throat. "I know the rules, Elena," Jordan said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I know we're supposed to keep the professional and the personal in separate, hermetically sealed containers. But I'm not a theorist. I don't believe in boundaries." She reached out, her hand gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind Elena's ear, just as she had the night before. But this time, in the daylight, the gesture felt different. It was public, yet intensely private. It was a declaration. "What are you saying?" Elena asked, her voice barely audible. "I'm saying," Jordan murmured, stepping into her personal space, "that I don't want to just be your lab partner. I don't want to just be the one who brings the chaos to your order. I want to be the one who walks with you, in the daylight, without having to hide behind a desk." Elena looked up at her, her eyes wide. The sunlight caught the amber in Jordan's eyes, making them look like molten gold. "That's risky, Jordan. People talk. The department is small." "Let them talk," Jordan said, her shrug dismissive. "We have the data. We have the proof of concept. If we're the best at what we do, they can't touch us." She reached out, her fingers cupping Elena's jaw, her thumb brushing against her cheekbone. Elena leaned into the touch, a natural, reflexive motion that made her heart ache with a sudden, overwhelming sense of belonging. "Are you scared?" Jordan asked, her voice tender. "I'm terrified," Elena admitted, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "I don't like uncertainty, Jordan. You know that. I like to be able to predict the outcome." "That's the beauty of it," Jordan said, a soft smile spreading across her face. "You can't predict this. It's an open system. It's a dynamic, evolving process. We're going to have to learn as we go. I'm not good at improvising." "You're better than you think," Jordan whispered. She leaned in, not to kiss her, but to press her forehead against Elena's, their breath mingling in the cool morning air. "You just need the right partner to show you the variables." Elena closed her eyes, letting herself be anchored by Jordan's presence. She felt the steady, calm rhythm of Jordan's breathing, a contrast to the frantic, erratic pulse of her own. For the first time, the chaos Jordan represented didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a necessary, vital component of her own existence. "Okay," Elena whispered. Jordan pulled back, her eyes searching Elena's face. "Okay." "Okay," Elena repeated, her voice stronger. "We can experiment. We can iterate." Jordan let out a laugh, a genuine, joyful sound, and pulled Elena into a tight, secure embrace. For a long moment, they stood there, two brilliant, complicated women on the cusp of something entirely new, framed by the quiet, early morning campus. The wind rustled through the trees, a soft, whispering sound that seemed to hold a promise of its own. They were standing in the open now, no longer hidden by the basement shadows, no longer protected by the sterile, controlled environment of the lab. They were exposed. They were vulnerable. And, as Elena realized with a jolt of pure, unadulterated clarity, they were exactly where they were supposed to be. "We have to go to the lecture," Jordan said, though she didn't let go. "I know," Elena said, resting her head against Jordan's shoulder, unwilling to break the contact. "Next experiment?" Jordan asked, her voice teasing. Elena looked up, her glasses slightly askew, her hair a mess, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked at Jordan, the woman who had shattered her walls, who had forced her to see the world in a different, more vibrant spectrum, and felt a wave of confidence she hadn't known she possessed. "Next experiment," Elena agreed. "But this time, I'm setting the parameters." Jordan grinned, a look of pure, unadulterated delight. "I can't wait." As they turned and walked toward the lecture hall, their hands brushed, a lingering, persistent contact that signaled the start of something that, for all its unpredictability, was undeniably, mathematically perfect. The story of the theorist and the experimentalist was just beginning, and as the morning sun climbed higher into the sky, illuminating the campus with a bright, relentless clarity, Elena knew one thing for certain: she was no longer a solitary variable. She was part of a reaction that was already, irrevocably, in motion. The lecture hall doors loomed ahead, a massive, imposing structure that usually filled Elena with a sense of dread. But today, with Jordan walking beside her, their shoulders occasionally bumping in a steady, comfortable rhythm, it felt less like a classroom and more like the beginning of an entirely new, complex, and deeply rewarding chapter. The variables were defined. The system was in play. And for the first time, Elena was looking forward to seeing how the reaction would resolve. The day stretched out before them, an open, unwritten equation, and for the first time in her life, Elena wasn't trying to solve for X. She was content to simply exist in the middle of the variable, held firmly by the hand of the woman who had turned her entire world into a beautiful, chaotic, and perfectly calibrated mess. They stepped into the lecture hall, the cool, air-conditioned air hitting them with a sudden, sharp reminder of the world they were entering. But it didn't matter. They were a unified, high-functioning system now, moving in a sync that no external environment could disrupt. The lecture began. The professor droned on about wave-particle duality, but Elena wasn't listening to the words. She was listening to the sound of Jordan's breathing beside her, the steady, rhythmic assurance that she was not alone. She opened her notebook, but instead of taking notes on quantum mechanics, she began to draw a small, complex diagram, a series of interconnected lines, a feedback loop that didn't resolve into a single point, but expanded, growing and changing with every stroke of the pen. Jordan glanced down, saw the drawing, and leaned in, her lips grazing the sensitive skin of Elena's ear. "That's a very unstable system you're designing, Miller," she whispered. Elena smiled, not looking away from the page, but feeling the heat of Jordan's breath, the proximity of her body, the undeniable, magnetic pull that had defined the last 24 hours. "It's not unstable," Elena whispered back, her voice steady and sure. "It's evolving." And in the heart of the lecture hall, surrounded by the crushing, predictable weight of academic routine, the two of them sat in the glow of a newfound, shared intensity, ready to see where the evolution would take them next. The experiment was ongoing. The results were unknown. But as Elena looked at the page, then at Jordan, she knew that whatever happened next, whatever variables were introduced, whatever challenges they faced, it would be the most significant breakthrough of her life. The lecture ended, the students filed out, the room emptied, and still they sat, two figures connected by a thread of pure, unadulterated potential, waiting for the rest of their lives to begin. The sun set, the moon rose, the world turned, and through it all, the reaction continued, a steady, pulsing, an infinitely complex chain of events that proved, above all else, that sometimes, the most important breakthroughs aren't found in a laboratory, but in the connections we build in the daylight, in the open, and in the company of the one person who makes every variable worth solving. The university library at midnight was a cathedral of hushed voices, flickering screens, and the distinctive, sharp scent of old paper and ozone. For Elena, it had always been a sanctuary, a place where the noise of the world was filtered out, leaving only the pure, clean lines of theory and logic. But tonight, the library felt different. Across the wide mahogany table, Jordan was currently deconstructing a sandwich with a lack of surgical precision that made Elena's eye twitch. It was their third night preparing for the upcoming departmental symposium. The grant proposal they had submitted was currently under review, but the presentation of their initial findings was non-negotiable. "You're over-indexing on the theoretical constraints," Jordan said, not looking up from her tablet. She took a bite of her sandwich, leaving a crumb on her lip that Elena found dangerously distracting. "The panel doesn't want to see a flawlessly derived equation that works in a vacuum. They want to see the application. They want to see the, dare I say, mess of reality." Elena adjusted her glasses, the motion purely habitual. She pushed her laptop 2 inches to the left, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the desk. "Reality is messy enough without us intentionally introducing noise into the data, Jordan. If the model isn't stable, the entire presentation collapses the moment we hit a QA session." Jordan set her tablet down and leaned back, her chair creaking in the stillness. She crossed her arms, her dark hair falling loosely over her forehead. "And if the model is too perfect, it looks fabricated. We need to show them the friction. We need to show them where the theory breaks, and how we patched it." Elena looked at her, really looked at her. The library light caught the amber in Jordan's eyes, softening the sharp, challenging expression into something more curious. The friction Jordan was talking about wasn't just in their data anymore. It was everywhere. It was in the way Jordan insisted on sitting close enough for their knees to brush. It was in the way she lingered on Elena's sentences, listening not just to the data, but to the person behind it. "You're suggesting we prioritize the story over the science," Elena said, though the protest lacked its usual bite. "I'm suggesting we weave them together," Jordan countered, her voice dropping into that lower, intimate register that always made the air between them feel thinner. She reached out, sliding a stack of research papers aside to make room, her fingers brushing against Elena's hand. The contact was brief, a mere graze, but it sent a familiar, electric jolt through Elena's chest. "Elena, look at me." Elena obeyed, finding herself anchored by Jordan's gaze. "We are a team now," Jordan said softly. "The theorist and the experimentalist. We aren't competing for the same spotlight. We're building a system. A symbiotic one." Elena felt her walls, the ones she had spent years carefully constructing, begin to soften. "Symbiotic," she repeated, the word tasting sweet. "Exactly." Jordan leaned forward, invading her space in the best possible way. She picked up Elena's stylus, twirling it idly between her fingers. "You provide the architecture. I provide the structural integrity. We don't need to choose between the theory and the mess. We just need to show them how we survive the collision." Elena took a breath, the scent of Jordan, vanilla, old books, and a faint hint of coffee, filling her senses. "Okay. Show me." For the next 4 hours, they worked with an intensity that bordered on euphoric. The library around them faded into nothingness. They were a single, high-functioning unit. When Elena grew frustrated with a complex calculation, Jordan would suggest a pivot, a shortcut that defied the traditional method but somehow yielded the same, perfect result. When Jordan's wild, chaotic ideas threatened to drift away from the core hypothesis, Elena would tether them back, refining the messy brilliance into something scalable. It was more than just academic collaboration. It was a dance. They swapped tasks, finished each other's sentences, and argued with a level of passion that would have been aggressive if it weren't so deeply, undeniably intimate. Every point of disagreement was met with a compromise that felt better than the original idea. Around 3 a.m., the library's automated lighting dimmed, leaving the aisles in shadow and their table bathed in the warm, focused glow of their shared task lamp. "I think that's it," Elena whispered, scrolling through the final slide of their presentation. It was beautiful. It was balanced. It was the perfect marriage of her precision and Jordan's adaptability. It's cohesive. Jordan looked at the screen, then at Elena. Her expression wasn't one of academic triumph, but of profound, quiet appreciation. She reached across the desk, her hand palm up, inviting. Elena hesitated, glancing toward the darkened rows of bookshelves, checking for the librarian or any late-night stragglers. The library was empty. The world was theirs. She placed her hand in Jordan's. Jordan's grip was firm, steady, and warm. She pulled gently, and Elena stood up, walking around the table until she was standing right beside Jordan's chair. "We make a good team, Miller," Jordan murmured, her voice thick with fatigue and something else, something raw and genuine. "We do," Elena agreed, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't think it was possible. I've always worked alone. I thought I was more efficient that way." "You were efficient," Jordan said, standing up to face her. "But you weren't complete. You were a closed system. You needed an external input to really spark." She stepped closer. The space between them, which had been filled with graphs and data points only moments ago, was now charged with an entirely different kind of energy. Jordan reached up, her fingers sliding behind Elena's neck, her touch light as a feather. "Is this the next variable?" Elena asked, her breath hitching as Jordan's thumb traced the line of her jaw. "This is the constant," Jordan corrected. She leaned in, her forehead resting against Elena's. "Everything else, the research, the symposium, the department chair, the grant, it's all flux. But this is the only thing I'm sure about." Elena closed her eyes, letting go of the residual tension of the long work session. She felt Jordan's breath against her lips, warm and inviting. "I used to be so afraid of being unscripted," Elena whispered. "I thought if I didn't plan for every contingency, I would fail." "You're not failing," Jordan said, her voice a low vibration that Elena felt in her own chest. "You're just iterating. We're in version 1.0 of us, Elena. It's buggy, and it's experimental, and it's terrifying. But it's the most exciting project I've ever worked on." Elena smiled, a small, genuine expression that reached her eyes. She reached up, adjusting Jordan's collar, her fingers lingering against the soft skin of her neck. I suppose I can accept a few bugs, provided the core stability is there." "The stability is there," Jordan promised. She leaned in, finally closing the distance. The kiss was slow, lingering, and filled with the shared exhaustion of the night. It wasn't the frantic, desperate kiss of their first encounter. It was something deeper, a seal of their partnership, a promise of the work they were going to do together. It tasted of coffee and late-night determination. When they finally pulled apart, the library felt too quiet, the air too still. "We should go," Elena said, though she didn't move. She wanted to stay in this suspended moment, in this quiet, golden circle of light, forever. "Yeah," Jordan agreed, tucking a loose strand of hair behind Elena's ear, her touch lingering. "We have to be up in 4 hours to prep for the trial run. But I don't want to go back to my dorm." Elena looked at her, a playful, uncharacteristic thought crossing her mind. "The lab is still open." Jordan laughed, a bright, genuine sound that echoed softly against the high ceilings of the library. "The lab? You want to go back to the lab? We just spent 4 hours there." "It's the only place I can think of," Elena admitted, a flush rising on her cheeks. "Where no one will ask us questions. Where the equipment is familiar. Where we know how to operate." "Dangerous," Jordan teased, her eyes glinting. "Very dangerous, Miller." "We're top-tier students, Jordan," Elena replied, her voice gaining a touch of that sharp, confident edge she usually reserved for seminars. "We know how to calculate risk." Jordan grinned, a look that promised trouble and delight in equal measure. She gathered her things, her movements fluid and confident. "Lead the way, then. But if we get caught in a compromising position by the overnight cleaning staff, I'm letting you do the explaining." They walked out of the library, the night air outside crisp and cold against their skin. The walk to the physics building was quiet, their fingers interlaced, a silent, defiant declaration against the dark. The campus was asleep, the trees swaying in a gentle, rhythmic breeze. As they reached the entrance of the annex, Elena paused. She looked up at the stars, bright and distant, then back at Jordan. "You know," Elena said, her voice soft in the quiet night. "I spent my whole life looking for the answer. The one, true, undeniable proof." "And?" Jordan asked, squeezing her hand. "And I think I've found it," Elena said, looking directly at her. "It's not in the data. It's not in the grant. It's not in the research. Where is it?" Elena smiled, leaning in to press a soft, lingering kiss to Jordan's cheek. "It's in the connection. It's in the symmetry." Jordan looked at her, her expression soft, vulnerable, and completely unguarded. "I think you're right, Miller. I think you're finally right." They entered the building, the familiar hum of the climate control greeting them like an old friend. They didn't head to the main lab, however. They turned down a side hallway, toward the observation deck, a small, glass-walled room that looked out over the entire campus, usually reserved for faculty meetings but currently empty. It was a space of transition, a place between the work and the world. Jordan walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the sprawling, sleeping university. The lights of the dormitories, the library, and the dining hall formed a complex, beautiful network, a literal map of the variables they were trying to navigate. Elena joined her, standing close. She didn't look at the campus. She looked at Jordan's reflection in the glass. "Do you think we can make it work?" Elena asked, her voice small, a sudden, piercing doubt cutting through the night. "The symposium, the research, the us." Jordan turned, her face partially illuminated by the soft glow of the city lights behind her. She reached out, cupping Elena's face in her hands, her thumbs brushing against her cheeks. "Elena," she said, her voice steady and sure. "We've solved for the hardest variable already. The rest is just algebra. We can handle it." She leaned in, her lips finding Elena's in a kiss that was both a reassurance and a challenge. It was a kiss that tasted of future possibilities, of shared late nights and early mornings, of arguments and resolutions, of a life being built, experiment by experiment, together. In the quiet, glass-walled room, suspended between the stars above and the earth below, Elena realized that the fear was gone. The chaos wasn't something to be managed anymore, it was something to be embraced. The uncertainty wasn't a threat, it was the space where they were going to create something new. She wasn't just a theorist, and Jordan wasn't just an experimentalist. They were partners, in the deepest, most complex, and most beautiful sense of the word. Okay, Elena whispered against Jordan's lips, a smile blooming in the dark. Let's iterate. Jordan laughed, the sound bright and hopeful, and pulled her closer. Outside, the night continued, indifferent to their quiet, private revolution. But in the observation deck, under the gaze of a million distant stars, a new reaction was beginning, one that would be, by all accounts, highly volatile, incredibly energetic, and entirely perfect. The night stretched on, a canvas for their potential. They stood there for a long time, simply existing in the presence of one another, the silence comfortable and thick with unspoken promises. There was so much they didn't know, what the symposium would bring, how they would handle the scrutiny, where the research would lead. But as Jordan's hand traced the arc of her spine, and as Elena felt the steady, reassuring warmth of her presence, she knew one thing for certain: whatever the future held, they were going to meet it with the same precision, the same passion, and the same unyielding belief in the validity of their shared experiment. The variables were defined. The foundation was set. And as the first hint of pre-dawn grey began to touch the eastern horizon, Elena realized that she didn't just understand the physics of attraction anymore. She was living it. Every look, every touch, every shared laugh was a testament to the fact that they were perfectly aligned. She was no longer the girl who needed to control every outcome. She was the girl who had found, in the most unlikely of places, her perfect, beautiful, and delightfully unpredictable variable. Ready? Jordan whispered, her eyes dark and intense. The experiment was just beginning. And as Elena looked at Jordan, at the messy hair, the sharp, intelligent eyes, and the smirk that had defined her entire world, she knew that she wouldn't have it any other way. Next experiment? Jordan asked, her voice teasing but soft. Elena looked up, her glasses slightly askew, her hair a mess, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked at Jordan, the woman who had shattered her walls, who had forced her to see the world in a different, more vibrant spectrum, and felt a wave of confidence she hadn't known she possessed. Next experiment, Elena agreed. But this time, I'm setting the parameters. Jordan grinned, a look of pure, unadulterated delight. I can't wait. As they reached the edge of the physics annex, the building standing tall and imposing in the morning light, Elena took a deep breath. She felt the weight of her bag, the familiar, grounding presence of her research, but more than that, she felt the warmth of Jordan's hand in hers. They weren't just colleagues. They weren't just rivals. They were something else entirely, a new, hybrid form of connection, a synthesis that defied the rules and created its own, beautiful, and enduring pattern. They walked into the lobby, the automatic doors sliding open with a soft, mechanical hiss. The world was waking up, the campus was filling with life, but for the two of them, everything had narrowed down to this moment, this place, and this partnership. The symposium was only hours away. The scrutiny would be intense, the questions sharp, the pressure mounting with every tick of the clock. But as Elena glanced at Jordan, she knew they were prepared. They had the data, they had the theory, and most importantly, they had each other. And that, she realized with a jolt of pure, unadulterated clarity, was the most important discovery of all. The experiment was not just a success, it was a breakthrough. And they weren't just getting started. The auditorium was a cavernous maw of polished wood, velvet upholstery, and the suffocating, heavy air of academic expectation. 2 hours before the event, the space was empty, save for the rhythmic, hollow echo of footsteps on the stage and the low, constant hum of the HVAC system struggling to cool the immense volume of the room. Elena stood by the projector console, her hands resting on the cool metal edge. Her charcoal blazer was sharp, structured, and felt like a suit of armor she wasn't entirely sure how to wear. She checked the connection to the monitor for the 10th time. The slide deck, a culmination of months of friction, sleepless nights, and the strange, electric evolution of their partnership, sat on the screen, a minimalist display of their data. "You're vibrating, Miller," a voice said, appearing from the shadows of the wings. Elena didn't turn. She knew the cadence of those footsteps, the specific, slightly dragging rhythm that signaled Jordan's arrival. She felt the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere, the air growing warmer, more charged, as if a localized weather system had just moved in. Jordan walked onto the stage. She was wearing a tailored black turtleneck and trousers, her hair pulled back into a messy knot that somehow looked more intentional and elegant than Elena's meticulously combed ponytail. She held 2 cups of coffee, the steam curling into the stale auditorium air. "I am not vibrating," Elena said, her voice tight. "I am simply running at a high frequency of anticipation." "That's a lie," Jordan said, walking over and handing her a cup. Their fingers brushed, the brief, skin-to-skin contact serving as a necessary grounding wire for Elena's fraying nerves. Jordan leaned against the podium, her shoulder pressing into Elena's, creating a sturdy, reassuring line of contact. "You're terrified. You're afraid the logic won't hold, the data will look like noise, and will be laughed off the stage." "It's a valid fear," Elena muttered, taking a sip of the coffee. It was black, bitter, and exactly what she needed. The review board has 3 Nobel laureates on it. Dr. Sterling is the one asking the questions. He spent his entire career debunking theories less ambitious than ours. "Sterling is a dinosaur," Jordan said, taking a casual, unbothered sip of her own drink. She turned her head, her gaze sweeping the empty rows of seats with a predatory, amusement-filled look. "He loves structure, symmetry, and predictability. Which is exactly why he's going to be blindsided. We aren't going to give him a perfect, sterile theory. We're going to give him the mess. We're going to show him how to calculate the chaos." Elena looked at her. Jordan's confidence was a physical force, a tangible weight that Elena felt she could lean into. "And if the mess breaks the model? Then we pivot," Jordan said, her eyes darkening, shifting from playful to intense. "We always pivot. That's what we do. You provide the architecture, I provide the stress test. It works, Elena. It works because it's not perfect. It works because it's real." Jordan reached out, her hand sliding under the podium to find Elena's. She interlaced their fingers, her palm warm and steady. The contact was a secret, a private anchor in the middle of the storm they were about to create. "Take a breath," Jordan whispered, her voice losing its edge, becoming soft and remarkably tender. "We aren't just 2 students on a stage. We're the solution to the problem Sterling has been stuck on for a decade. Own that." The auditorium doors began to creak open. The muffled sound of voices drifted in, the murmur of colleagues, rivals, and the judging panel filtering in, finding their seats. The time for rehearsals was over. They released hands, their movements synchronized and efficient. The transition from private partners to professional rivals, and eventually, collaborators, happened in the space of a heartbeat. Elena adjusted her glasses, Jordan straightened her collar. "Ready?" Jordan asked, her expression unreadable, a professional mask that only Elena could see through. "Ready," Elena replied, her heart hammering a steady, rhythmic, and perfectly controlled tempo. The presentation started with a singular, sharp focus. As they stepped to the center of the stage, the spotlight was blinding, a brilliant, focused cone that washed out the audience and turned the auditorium into a black, infinite space. Elena took the lead, her voice resonant and steady as she walked the board through the theoretical framework of their quantum coherence model. She spoke of wave-particle duality, of the entropic decay of quantum buffers, and of the elegant, albeit complex, mathematical proofs she had spent months refining. She was precise, articulate, and deeply in the flow. She felt the words coming to her with a natural, effortless grace, the theory unfolding like a map she had memorized in her sleep. But when the moment came to address the practical application, the stress of the system, she stepped back, and Jordan stepped forward. Jordan was a force of nature. She didn't just present the data, she performed it. She showed the board the failure points, the catastrophic errors that occurred when the system was pushed beyond its limits, and then, with a flourish, she showed them the solution. She demonstrated how they had engineered a feedback loop that used the instability to stabilize the coherence. It was brilliant. It was dangerous. It was exactly the kind of messy science that made the audience lean in, captivated. Then, the QA began. Dr. Sterling, a man with a reputation for dismantling grad students for sport, stood up. He adjusted his glasses, his eyes sharp and analytical. "A fascinating, if somewhat volatile, proposal, Ms. Miller, Ms. Vance. But I find your reliance on the feedback loop to be fundamentally unstable. You are essentially suggesting that a system can maintain equilibrium by constantly oscillating. That defies the second law of thermodynamics." The silence in the auditorium was absolute. The room held its breath. Elena felt the familiar, icy spike of anxiety in her chest. The theory was sound, the math was correct, but articulating it under this level of scrutiny felt like trying to explain a complex poem to a machine. She opened her mouth to begin the rebuttal, but Jordan moved before she could. "The second law applies to closed systems, Dr. Sterling," Jordan said, her voice polite, calm, and terrifyingly sharp. "But our model is not a closed system. It is an open, entropic engine. An open system." Sterling countered, his voice rising, a challenge ringing out. "And where, pray tell, is the energy dissipation occurring? You are claiming a perpetual state of coherence that, according to my calculations, should collapse within a microsecond." Elena took a breath, the panic receding, replaced by the cool, hard logic of her preparation. She stepped up to the microphone, her eyes locked on Sterling's. "It doesn't dissipate, Dr. Sterling. It cycles." She pointed to the slide behind them, a complex, rotating visualization of their quantum state. "The energy isn't lost. It's transformed. It's stored in the quantum buffer and recycled back into the manifold. It's not an oscillation. It's a resonance. We're using the system's own internal noise to reinforce the signal." Sterling frowned, his eyes darting back and forth between the slide and the two women on the stage. He was calculating, the gears turning in his head, the conflict between his established doctrine and the new data clearly visible on his face. Jordan took the reins, pivoting effortlessly. We can demonstrate the coherence stability in the auxiliary simulation, Dr. Sterling. The data is all there. We aren't proposing a static solution. We're proposing a dynamic state. One that evolves. One that learns. The exchange lasted for 20 minutes. It was a brutal, intellectual sparring match. They were pushed, grilled, and interrogated. And through it all, they didn't just survive, they thrived. When they defended, they didn't do it as individuals. They did it as a unit. When Sterling questioned the theory, Elena was there with the math. When he questioned the hardware, Jordan was there with the empirical proof. They moved in perfect, synchronized opposition to his skepticism, a high-functioning, double helix of intellectual power that eventually left the professor with no further ground to stand on. When Sterling finally sat down, his expression was a mix of annoyance and, surprisingly, a begrudging respect. "I see," he muttered, closing his folder. "It is a provocative approach. I will need to review the raw data in the appendix. But you have certainly made a compelling case." The auditorium broke into a low murmur of conversation. The tension in the room, which had been thick enough to cut, suddenly dissipated, replaced by a wave of relief that crashed over Elena, leaving her slightly dizzy. They finished the presentation, answered a few more questions from the junior faculty, and then, finally, the moderator signaled the end of the session. As they walked off the stage, Elena's legs felt like jelly. The adrenaline was beginning to crash, leaving her exhausted and exhilarated all at once. She didn't stop until they reached the darkened, quiet sanctuary of the backstage wings. The moment they were out of sight, Jordan turned, her face a tapestry of relief and pure, unfiltered joy. She didn't wait. She grabbed Elena's lapels, pulled her in, and pressed her back against the cool, brick wall of the backstage corridor. "We did it," Jordan whispered, her breath hitching, her eyes bright with a triumphant, wild light. "We absolutely crushed him." Elena let out a shaky, breathless laugh, her hands coming up to rest on Jordan's shoulders. The adrenaline was still humming through her veins, a potent, intoxicating cocktail of victory and proximity. "I thought I was going to pass out when he started talking about the second law." "You were brilliant," Jordan said, her voice dropping, becoming intimate, private. She leaned in, her forehead resting against Elena's, the intensity of her gaze melting the last of Elena's defenses. "I've never seen you like that. You were unstoppable." "You were, you." "We," Elena corrected, her voice soft. "We were unstoppable." Jordan smiled, a slow, beautiful expression that made Elena's heart skip a beat. She reached out, her fingers tangling in Elena's hair, undoing the tight, professional bun and letting the dark strands fall loose around her face. It was a gesture of liberation, of shedding the role, of coming back to themselves. "We were," Jordan agreed. She looked at Elena, really looked at her, her eyes scanning her face with a profound, tender focus. "That was something, wasn't it? The way we worked together. The way we just clicked." "It was," Elena admitted, leaning in, her lips finding Jordan's in a kiss that was both a celebration and a confession. It was a kiss that tasted of victory, of coffee, and of the deep, enduring connection they had spent the last several weeks building. It was a slow, lingering kiss, a quiet, private moment in the middle of a world that was suddenly feeling very large. When they finally pulled apart, the air in the wings felt different, softer, warmer, charged with a new, quiet certainty. "What happens now?" Elena asked, her voice breathless, her eyes searching Jordan's. "Now?" Jordan repeated, a playful, mischievous glint returning to her eyes. "Now, we go to the reception. We let them toast us. We accept our praise. And then, when the sun goes down and everyone else has gone home." She leaned in, her lips grazing the sensitive skin of Elena's ear. "We celebrate in a way that doesn't involve quantum mechanics or department chairs." Elena felt a flush rise to her cheeks, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "I think I like the sound of that experiment." Jordan chuckled, the sound vibrating against Elena's chest. "I knew you would, Miller." They emerged from the wings, the auditorium lights reflecting off the polished floors, the sounds of the reception filtering in from the foyer. They walked out, side by side, their hands finding each other's as they stepped into the bright, open space. People were turning, looking, whispering. The department chair, Dr. Aries, was making a beeline toward them, a wide, congratulatory smile on his face. The pressure was over. The scrutiny had passed. The results were in. But as Elena looked at Jordan, the messy hair, the confident, easy stride, the way she didn't care who saw them together, she knew that the success of the presentation was only the beginning. They had solved the problem, yes. They had satisfied the board, yes. But they had also done something far more important, far more complex, and far more rewarding. They had found the variable that turned their own, individual existence into something greater, something stronger, and something entirely, beautifully their own. They walked toward the reception, a pair of triumphant, brilliant, and deeply connected minds, ready to face the applause, the questions, and the accolades. But in the back of Elena's mind, she was already looking forward to the night, to the quiet, to the privacy, and to the next, most exciting iteration of their experiment. The day had been a masterpiece of friction, attraction, and, ultimately, a perfect, logical, and deeply human connection. And as she glanced at Jordan, she knew that the experiment was far from over. In fact, she suspected it was only just beginning, and for the first time in her life, the unpredictability of it all didn't scare her. It felt like exactly what she had been missing. The room was full of people, the air thick with congratulations, but for Elena, there was only the steady, grounding presence of the woman beside her. She was no longer a solitary variable. She was part of a reaction that was already, irrevocably, in motion. The reception stretched out before them, an endless, golden opportunity to celebrate, to breathe, and to be. And as they stepped into the crowd, ready to accept their due, Elena knew that no matter where the future led, no matter the symposiums, the grants, or the academic careers, they would always be, in the most important way, perfectly, inevitably, aligned. She took a breath, letting the thrill of the victory wash over her, and then, with a confident, steady step, she walked into the rest of their lives. The variables were defined. The foundation was set. And as the day finally came to an end, casting the campus in the long, soft shadows of evening, Elena realized that she didn't just understand the physics of attraction anymore. She was living it. Every look, every touch, every shared laugh was a testament to the fact that they were perfectly aligned. She was no longer the girl who needed to control every outcome. She was the girl who had found, in the most unlikely of places, her perfect, beautiful, and delightfully unpredictable variable. And as they stood in the center of the reception, toasts ringing out around them, they looked at each other, a quiet, secret communication that said everything that needed to be said. They had made it. They had proven the theory. And they had, in the process, created something that was, by all accounts, highly volatile, incredibly energetic, and entirely perfect. The experiment was a success. The variables were solved. And the next chapter? Well, the next chapter was theirs to write, one variable at a time. The lights of the reception hall dimmed, the music began to swell, and for a moment, in the middle of the crowded room, Elena and Jordan stood in a small, quiet island of their own making. To the experiment, Jordan whispered, raising her glass. Elena clinked her glass against Jordan's, a clear, ringing sound that felt like a bell marking the start of a new era. To the experiment, Elena agreed. And as they turned back to the crowd, the world, and the future, they did so as a unit, a team, a partnership, and a bond that nothing, not even the most complex of variables, could ever hope to break. The story, they both knew, was just starting, and it was going to be a masterpiece. The friction, the attraction, the unpredictability, it was all there, waiting for them, an endless, evolving, and beautifully complex loop. They walked, they laughed, they talked, and they existed, a singular, powerful force in the middle of an academic world that was just beginning to understand the magnitude of what they had just created. The night was theirs. The future was theirs. And for the first time in her life, Elena was content to simply exist in the middle of the variable, held firmly by the hand of the woman who had turned her entire world into a beautiful, chaotic, and perfectly calibrated mess. And as the last of the guests filtered out, the hall falling into the quiet, cool silence of the night, they were finally, truly, alone. Ready? Jordan asked, her eyes dark, her voice low. Elena looked at her, at the woman who had challenged her, inspired her, and ultimately, completed her. She saw the potential, the possibility, and the promise of everything that was to come. Ready, Elena said, her voice steady and sure. And together, they walked out of the hall, out of the building, and into the cool, star-filled night, ready to begin the next, most exciting phase of their experiment. The experiment was just getting started. And they were, in every way that mattered, exactly where they were supposed to be. The symposium was over, the work was done, the thesis was proven, and the results were in. They were, unequivocally, undeniably, and perfectly, a match. The future was bright, the variables were solved, and the experiment was, by all measures, a massive, resounding, and beautiful success. They were, and they would always be, the perfect reaction. The transition from the high-octane pressure of the symposium to the silence of the night was jarring, almost physical in its intensity. The university auditorium, with its polished wood and expectant gazes, felt like a lifetime ago, even though it had only been 4 hours. Now, the city of Boston was a blurred ribbon of amber streetlights and obsidian shadows, sliding past the rain-slicked windows of Jordan's beat-up sedan. Elena sat in the passenger seat, her head resting against the cool glass. She felt hollowed out, not in a bad way, but in the way a kiln felt after the fire was extinguished, leaving behind something hardened, something altered. Her blazer was folded neatly in her lap, the structural rigidity of it no longer necessary. She had spent the last 3 months terrified of the symposium, of Dr. Sterling, of the sheer, crushing weight of academic scrutiny. And they had survived. They had done more than survive, they had flourished. Jordan was driving with one hand on the wheel, the other tapping a restless, rhythmic beat against her thigh. She wasn't wearing her signature leather jacket anymore, she had swapped it for a soft, worn in grey hoodie that made her look younger, less like the formidable, sharp-witted experimentalist who had dismantled the department chair's arguments, and more like a person, just a person. "You're quiet," Jordan said, not looking away from the road, though the corner of her mouth quirked upward. "I'm processing," Elena replied, her voice soft. "The adrenaline is finally bottoming out. I think my entire nervous system is currently in a state of entropy." "Entropy," Jordan chuckled, a low, warm sound that filled the confined space of the car. "That's the scientist in you talking. Most people would just say they're tired." "I am tired," Elena admitted, turning to look at her. In the sporadic flashes of light from the passing street lamps, Jordan's profile looked softer, the sharp angles of her jaw and nose illuminated for fleeting seconds. "But it's a strange kind of exhaustion. It feels like completion. I haven't finished a project and felt this way before. Usually, I just feel the immediate need to start the next one." Jordan pulled the car into the narrow driveway of an old, brick apartment building in the quieter part of the city. She killed the engine, and the sudden silence of the night rushed in to take its place. She didn't move to get out immediately. Instead, she leaned back, turning her body toward Elena. "That's because usually, you're working to prove yourself," Jordan said, her voice dropping into that register that always made Elena's heart skip a beat, a register that was devoid of sarcasm, devoid of the need to challenge. It was just honest. You were building things to satisfy a rubric, to tick a box, to get the gold star from the faculty. This time, we were building something because we had to. We were solving a problem that actually mattered to us. Elena looked at her, searching for the ego, the bravado, the need for validation. She found none. Jordan was looking at her with a clarity that was almost unnerving. "You're right," Elena whispered. "I know I am," Jordan teased, though the light in her eyes was soft. She reached out, her hand finding Elena's in the dark. It was a firm, grounding touch. "Come on. Let's get you inside. If I don't feed you something with actual nutritional value, I suspect you might vanish into thin air, and that would be a catastrophic loss to the scientific community." Jordan's apartment was the antithesis of the physics annex. Where the lab was sterile, cold, and precisely organized, this place was a testament to organized chaos. Books were stacked in precarious towers on every available surface, a telescope stood in the corner, pointed toward the curtained window, mugs were scattered across the coffee table, remnants of long study sessions. It was warm, it smelled like cedarwood and old paper, and it felt, to Elena's surprise, like home. Jordan hung her keys by the door and moved to the small kitchenette, her movements efficient. "Wine? Tea? Or are we going to succumb to the law of the instant noodles in the pantry?" "Wine would be excellent," Elena said, settling onto the worn velvet sofa. She took off her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. The world blurred at the edges, a soft, impressionistic painting, and she found she didn't mind the lack of sharp focus. Jordan returned with 2 glasses of red wine, the deep color catching the light of the single lamp she had turned on. She sat down next to Elena, close enough that Elena could feel the radiant heat of her, close enough that the proximity was a constant, hummed frequency in the air. "To the symposium," Jordan said, clinking her glass against Elena's. "To the symposium," Elena echoed. She took a sip. It was good wine, bold, complex, with a hint of dark berries. "Are you going to miss it?" "The pressure, I mean." Jordan leaned back, resting her head against the back of the sofa, looking up at the ceiling. "The pressure? No. The stakes? Maybe. There's something addictive about standing in front of a room full of people who are waiting for you to fail, and then proving them wrong with a line of math. You made it look easy, Elena said. It wasn't easy, Jordan countered. It was only possible because you were there. You were the anchor. Every time I felt like I was drifting into a tangent, you were there to pull me back to the core. You don't realize how much you do, Elena. You think you're just the one with the formulas, but you're the one who keeps the system from imploding. Elena felt a blush creep up her neck. She set her glass down on the coffee table. I suppose that's the nature of our symbiosis. I provide the structure, you provide the energy. The energy, Jordan repeated, her voice turning contemplative. She shifted, turning slightly so she was facing Elena. The movement was deliberate, a narrowing of the distance between them. I was thinking about that during the drive home. About how we function. It's not just a professional thing, is it? It hasn't been for a long time. The air in the apartment seemed to thicken, the ambient noise of the city outside fading into a distant, inconsequential hum. This was the moment, the space where the work ended and the reality began. No, Elena said, her voice steady, though her heart was drumming a frantic, erratic rhythm against her ribs. It hasn't been. Jordan reached out, her fingers grazing the back of Elena's hand. The touch was light, almost tentative, a stark contrast to the aggressive, teasing confidence she usually projected. I've spent a lot of time over the last few months trying to figure out what the variables of us are. Trying to see if there was a theorem for this. For the way my pulse jumps when you walk into the room, or for the way I find myself looking for you in the lecture hall before I even know what the professor is saying. Elena looked at her, her eyes wide, her breath catching in her throat. She had felt those same things, the inexplicable, irrational pull, the way Jordan had become the constant in her life, the one thing she measured all other things against. And? Elena asked, her voice barely a whisper. Did you solve for it? Jordan smiled, not the smirk she wore when she was winning an argument, but a genuine, soft smile that reached all the way to her eyes. There's no solution. I checked. It's an irrational number. It doesn't terminate, it doesn't repeat, and it doesn't fit into any of the standard models. She moved her hand, her thumb tracing the line of Elena's jaw, moving up to tuck a strand of dark hair behind her ear. And the funniest part? I don't want to solve it. I don't want to reduce it to a calculation. I just want to observe it. I want to see where it goes. Elena felt the tension that had been holding her together since the morning of the symposium begin to melt away. She leaned into Jordan's touch, closing her eyes, a sigh escaping her lips. I spent so long being afraid of the unknown, Jordan. I thought if I couldn't understand something, it was dangerous. I thought I had to quantify it to be safe. You are safe, Jordan murmured, her hand sliding down to cup the back of Elena's neck, her fingers tangling in her hair. You're safe with me. Elena opened her eyes, looking directly into Jordan's. There was no hesitation now, no professional barrier, no academic pretense. There was only the woman who had challenged her, inspired her, and held her together through the most volatile, energetic chapter of her life. I know, Elena said, and for the first time, she truly meant it. Jordan leaned in, her movements slow, deliberate, giving Elena every opportunity to pull away. But Elena didn't move. She stayed right where she was, waiting, anticipating, wanting. When their lips met, it was like the convergence of two long-running experiments. The result was explosive, yet perfectly, logically inevitable. It was a kiss that tasted of red wine and the quiet, intimate promise of a night that had no deadlines, no symposia, no tomorrow to prepare for. It was soft at first, a gentle, exploratory pressure, then it deepened, becoming more insistent, more demanding. Jordan's hand tightened in her hair, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them, until they were pressed together, two bodies finding their center of gravity. Elena's hands found the fabric of Jordan's hoodie, her fingers curling into the soft, worn cotton, pulling her in as if she were anchoring herself against a tide. The world outside the apartment, the university, the research, the expectations, ceased to exist. There was only the feeling of Jordan's skin, the smell of cedarwood and faint, lingering coffee, and the overwhelming, beautiful reality of the connection they had built. They shifted on the sofa, their motion fluid, a natural adaptation to the new, shared space. Jordan leaned back, pulling Elena with her, so that Elena was partially draped across her lap. It was intimate, vulnerable, and incredibly, intensely grounding. Jordan broke the kiss, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. She rested her forehead against Elena's, her eyes closed, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. "So," Jordan whispered, her voice rough, lacking its usual sharp edge. "We've successfully verified the hypothesis. Now we're moving into the long-term observation phase." Elena laughed, a light, airy sound that felt like the release of a coiled spring. She reached up, her fingers tracing the line of Jordan's cheekbone, marveling at the softness of her skin, the warmth, the life. "I think that's a fair assessment," Elena said. "But be warned, Jordan. Long-term observation requires constant, careful documentation." Jordan opened her eyes, the dark amber depths of them filled with a promise that made Elena's stomach flip. "Oh, I plan on keeping very thorough notes, Miller. Every single day." She leaned in again, capturing Elena's lips in a kiss that was more confident, more possessive, and infinitely more tender. It was a kiss that felt like a beginning, the start of a project that wouldn't end when the semester was over, or when the grant money ran out. This was an ongoing, evolving, and infinitely expanding collaboration. The apartment around them grew quiet, the city lights outside casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The night was young, the future was an unmapped territory, and for the first time in her life, Elena wasn't worried about the trajectory. She wasn't worried about the variables, the unknowns, or the potential for failure. Because as she lay there, held in the arms of the woman who had turned her entire world upside down, she realized that they had created something that couldn't be quantified by a formula or proven by a peer review board. They had created a resonance, a shared frequency that was stronger than the sum of its parts. "What are you thinking about?" Jordan whispered, her voice a low, vibrating murmur against Elena's skin. "I'm thinking," Elena said, her voice soft, "about how much I have to learn. About this. About us." "That's the beauty of it," Jordan said, pulling her closer, her chin resting on top of Elena's head. "We have the rest of our lives to figure it out. We don't have to get it all right tonight." "We don't," Elena teased. "I thought you were a perfectionist." Jordan chuckled, the sound deep and rich. "I am. But I've decided that perfect isn't a destination. It's the process. It's the way we work together. It's the way we handle the friction." Elena closed her eyes, the warmth of the moment wrapping around her like a blanket. She was tired, yes, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that followed a long, satisfying day of work, the kind that comes from knowing you've given everything you have to something that truly mattered. "I'm glad we're in this together," Elena said, the admission quiet but final. "Me too," Jordan whispered. "I wouldn't have it any other way. There's no one else I'd rather collide with." They stayed like that for a long time, a stillness that was filled with the quiet, contented rhythm of their breathing, the slow, steady beat of their hearts. It was a moment of perfect, unadulterated peace, a rare, golden island in the middle of their chaotic, brilliant, and demanding lives. The wine sat forgotten on the table, the lamp flickered once and then dimmed, but it didn't matter. The light wasn't coming from the lamp anymore. It was coming from the connection, from the shared, quiet, and intense focus they had on one another. Elena shifted, her head finding a comfortable place on Jordan's shoulder, her hand resting over Jordan's heart, feeling the steady, rhythmic pulse beneath the fabric of the hoodie. It was a sound she could listen to forever, a steady, reliable, and entirely unique rhythm. "You know," Elena said, her voice growing heavy with sleep, "I think we're going to be okay. Even without the lab. We're going to be more than okay," Jordan promised, her hand coming up to stroke Elena's hair, her touch soothing, rhythmic, and infinitely tender. "We're going to be magnificent." Elena drifted then, the edges of the room blurring, the sounds of the city fading into the background, the warmth of Jordan's presence the only thing that remained solid, the only thing that was real. She was no longer the girl who needed to solve facts. She was the girl who had found, in the most unlikely of places, her perfect, beautiful, and delightfully unpredictable variable. She had found her resonance. She had found her partner. And as she fell into the quiet, dark space between wakefulness and sleep, she knew one thing for certain: the experiment was just beginning, and she couldn't wait to see what happened when they woke up tomorrow. The night continued, the city turned, the stars wheeled across the sky, but in the small, warm, and chaotic apartment, everything was in equilibrium. Everything was in its right place. Everything was, in the most profound and simple way, exactly as it was meant to be. They were two brilliant minds, two complex souls, two forces that had, against all odds, found their symmetry. And as the night deepened, they stayed right there, locked in their shared, quiet, and perfect orbit, ready for the dawn to break, ready to start the next, most exciting phase of their shared, unfolding, and beautiful life. It wasn't just about the science. It wasn't just about the success. It was about the way they held each other, the way they looked at each other, and the way they were, together, something that was entirely, undeniably, and beautifully more than the sum of its parts. And as the last of the streetlights turned off, replaced by the soft, grey, and hopeful light of the pre-dawn, they were still there, a testament to the power of the collision, the beauty of the friction, and the enduring, unbreakable strength of the connection they had built. The experiment was a resounding success. And the life they were beginning was, without a doubt, the most brilliant, complex, and beautiful equation they would ever solve. They slept, they dreamed, and they waited for the morning, a new beginning, a new day, and a new, endless series of possibilities, all waiting for them to explore, together, one variable, one breath, and one perfect, synchronized heartbeat at a time. The story was far from over. In fact, as the sun began to climb, painting the world in gold, it felt like the prologue had just been written, and the real story, the one that would last, the one that would define them, was just beginning. And they were ready. They were more than ready. They were synchronized, they were resonant, and they were, together, a force that the world, the whole, vast, chaotic world, would have to contend with. The experiment was over. The life was beginning. And as they opened their eyes to the morning, they knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together, perfectly aligned, perfectly balanced, and perfectly, wonderfully in love. The variables were defined. The foundation was set. And as the day began, they moved, as one, into the bright, promising, and entirely theirs future. The resonance was absolute. The frequency was perfect. And the connection? The connection was, and would always be, the only thing that mattered. Everything was in equilibrium. And it was, quite simply, beautiful. The morning light filtering through the sheer curtains of Jordan's apartment was not the harsh, clinical glare of the physics laboratory. It was a soft, diffuse glow that turned the floating dust motes into tiny, suspended constellations. Elena woke slowly, her internal clock struggling to reconcile the lack of a ticking countdown with the sudden, overwhelming silence of the room. For the first time in 3 months, she didn't reach for her tablet. She didn't check the server status of the quantum array. Instead, she let her eyes wander across the room, taking in the unfamiliar topography of Jordan's life, the stack of physics journals teetering on the desk, the discarded leather jacket draped over the chair, the telescope pointed toward the sliver of city sky. Then, she felt the weight. Jordan was still asleep, her arm thrown carelessly across Elena's waist, her breathing deep and rhythmic. The contact was heavy, grounding, and absolute. Elena lay perfectly still, tracing the pattern of the morning light across Jordan's face. The harsh lines of the symposium, the intellectual sparring, the defense of the theory, the public scrutiny, felt like a dream. This, however, was the reality. And the reality was, quite simply, that she was here. She wasn't just a theorist anymore. She wasn't just a student. She was a participant in something that felt far more complex than any quantum model she had ever designed. A few minutes later, Jordan stirred. Her eyes opened, not with the slow, groggy confusion of most people, but with an immediate, piercing clarity that snapped to Elena. A slow, lopsided grin bloomed across her face. "You're awake," Jordan murmured, her voice thick with sleep. She didn't pull away, if anything, she pressed closer, her chin resting on Elena's shoulder. "I was beginning to think you were part of the furniture. Or perhaps a new, very quiet, very intellectual piece of decor." Elena laughed, the sound bright in the quiet room. "I was just calibrating. It's a delicate process. I bet." Jordan kissed the curve of her neck, a soft, lingering touch that sent a shiver through Elena's spine. "So, what's the consensus? Does the morning look favorable for a continuation of the experiment, or has the theory evolved?" Elena turned in her arms, finding herself nose to nose with Jordan. The tangled hair, the sleep-softened expression, it was a version of Jordan that only existed here, behind the closed door of the apartment. "The theory is still in development," Elena said, her voice dropping. "But the variables remain constant. I think I'd like to keep observing." Jordan chuckled and rolled over, pulling Elena with her until they were tangled in the sheets. "Good. Because I have a very extensive, very rigorous syllabus for today. It involves coffee, a complete avoidance of the university server, and at least 3 hours of absolutely nothing." "Absolutely nothing?" Elena teased. "That sounds highly inefficient." "That," Jordan said, kissing her nose, "is the point." They spent the morning in a haze of domesticity that felt like a luxury Elena hadn't known she was missing. They made coffee in the cramped kitchenette, the air filling with the rich, dark scent of roast beans. They shared a loaf of stale bread, toasted with jam, standing at the counter in the sunlight. It was a mundane sequence of events, but beneath the surface, the tension hummed, a constant, underlying current of attraction that had nowhere to go but inward. Every touch, the brush of a shoulder as they reached for the sugar, the lingering gaze across the table, the way Jordan would occasionally lean in and rest her head against Elena's back, was a language they were learning to speak. By noon, the reality of the outside world began to nudge at the edges of their bubble. "We have to go back to campus eventually," Elena noted, leaning against the counter while Jordan rinsed the mugs. "Dr. Aries is going to want a post-symposium breakdown. And I assume the department wants to discuss the grant funding." Jordan sighed, a sharp, dramatic sound that made Elena smile. She turned off the faucet and leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. "The grant. Right. The money. The glory. The relentless demand for more, more, more." She looked at Elena, her expression sharpening. "You know, we don't have to stay, Elena. We proved the theory. We stood up to Sterling. We're top tier. If you want to take a year off, travel, go to Europe, work on a private contract, I'm in." Elena blinked, surprised. The idea was so far outside the parameters of her carefully constructed life that it felt like a jolt of electricity. "You're serious?" "Deadly serious," Jordan said. "I'm an experimentalist, Miller. I follow where the data leads. And right now, the data is telling me that I'm tired of working for other people's timelines." Elena thought about it. She thought about the rigid schedule of the graduate program, the constant push to publish, the unending climb toward a tenure-track position. And then she thought about the freedom of working with Jordan, the way they had bypassed the expected path, the way they had built their own system. "I don't think I want to leave," Elena admitted, a small, genuine smile forming. "But I think I want to change the terms of the engagement." "How so?" Jordan asked, her eyes lighting up. "I don't want to just be a graduate student under Aries anymore," Elena said, her voice gaining a steely, professional edge. "I want to be the principal investigator of our own research. I want to build our own lab. A private one. One where we decide the variables." Jordan whistled low and impressed. "A rogue lab. I like it. We'd need funding. And equipment. And a whole lot of audacity." "We have the symposium success," Elena reminded her. "We have the proof of concept. If we package the presentation correctly, we can sell it to the private sector. We don't need the department's blessing. We just need their equipment until we can afford our own." Jordan stepped closer, her expression shifting from playfulness to a deep, intense focus. She reached out, taking Elena's hands in hers. "You're talking about a partnership. A real, long-term one. Beyond the grad school phase." "I am," Elena said, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I'm talking about us. As a unit. As a constant." Jordan looked at her for a long time, the silence in the kitchen stretching out, heavy with potential. Then, she leaned in, her forehead pressing against Elena's. "You're terrifying, Miller. You know that. You're smarter, more ambitious, and more dangerous than anyone I've ever met. Is that a yes?" "That's a hell of a yes." Jordan kissed her, not with the morning softness of earlier, but with a fierce, driving intensity that promised action, that promised movement, that promised a future that they would build together. The walk back to campus felt different. The autumn air was crisp, the leaves crunching beneath their feet, but for Elena, the world looked like a set of possibilities instead of a series of constraints. She walked with her head up, her stride matching Jordan's. They weren't just students returning to their place in the hierarchy. They were architects returning to the site of their first success, ready to draw up the blueprints for the next phase. When they reached the physics building, the lobby was bustling. Students were hurrying to classes, professors were huddled in earnest conversation, and the sheer, relentless energy of the academic machine was in full force. Elena felt a momentary surge of anxiety, the old instinct to blend in, to keep her head down, to follow the protocol. Then she felt Jordan's hand slip into hers. It was a simple gesture, barely noticeable to anyone else, but it grounded her. It was a reminder that she wasn't alone, that she didn't have to follow the protocol because she had someone to rewrite it with. They walked toward the elevator. As the doors opened, they stepped inside, a quiet, contained space of stainless steel and fluorescent light. Jordan pressed the button for the sub-basement, for the lab. "You ready for the breakdown?" Jordan asked, leaning against the back wall, her eyes fixed on Elena. "I'm ready," Elena said, her voice steady. "I have a lot to say to Dr. Aries. And I think he's going to be very interested in what we have to offer." "You're going to negotiate him into a corner, aren't you?" Jordan teased, her smirk returning. "I'm going to present him with an opportunity he can't refuse," Elena corrected, a glimmer of amusement in her eyes. "I'm going to show him the value of an open system." The elevator dinged, and they stepped out into the familiar, humming air of the lab floor. It was colder here, the ventilation systems whirring, the blue status lights on the racks blinking with a steady, robotic precision. But as Elena looked around the space, the desks, the terminals, the whiteboard covered in their scribbled equations, it didn't look like a prison anymore. It looked like a workspace. It looked like the beginning. They walked toward their desk, their footsteps echoing in the large room. Several other students were working, their faces illuminated by the screens, their posture hunched and tense. Elena noticed the contrast, the weight of their isolation, the struggle to make sense of the data on their own. She looked at Jordan, who was already pulling up their presentation on her tablet, her fingers moving with a swift, confident grace. "We need to consolidate the data from the final run," Jordan said, looking over at her. "The feedback loop, the stability markers, if we're going to pitch this, we need the raw numbers to be bulletproof." "I'll pull the logs," Elena said, sitting down at the console. She felt a surge of excitement, a genuine, intellectual thrill. This was the work. This was the foundation. They worked for hours, the world outside the lab ceasing to exist as they dove back into the complexity of their research. But this time, it was different. There was no deadline, no symposium hovering over them, no fear of failure. There was just the joy of discovery, the thrill of the puzzle, and the deep, abiding comfort of doing it together. At one point, Elena got stuck on a derivation. She stared at the screen, her mind racing, trying to account for an anomaly in the thermal variance. She felt a hand rest gently on her shoulder. "Look at the baseline, Elena," Jordan whispered, leaning over her, her scent, coffee and rain, filling the space. "You're trying to solve the anomaly as a flaw. What if it's a feature? What if the heatsink is actually transferring the energy instead of just dissipating it?" Elena looked at the code. She rerun the simulation, her fingers flying over the keys. The screen flashed, the data reconfigured, and suddenly, the entire equation stabilized. She turned, her eyes wide. "You're right. It's a heat exchanger. We've been building a battery, but it's actually a generator." Jordan grinned, a look of pure, unadulterated delight. "A generator. That's even better." That changes everything. It does, Elena said, her voice filled with wonder. She looked at Jordan, and for a moment, the science, the research, the future, it all faded into the background. There was just the two of them, standing in the middle of the lab, a pair of minds in sync, a pair of hearts in resonance. Jordan reached out, tucking a loose lock of hair behind Elena's ear, her thumb brushing against her cheek. It was a lingering, tender touch, a reminder of the quiet, intimate morning they had just shared. "We make a good team," Jordan said, her voice soft. "We do," Elena agreed. "A very good team." The lab was quiet, the others having long since left for the night. The blue lights of the servers cast long, soft shadows across the floor. They were alone in the sanctuary of their research, two figures in the glow of their own creation. "We should get some rest," Jordan suggested, though she made no move to head for the door. "We've done enough for one day. We have the proof for the pitch." "I know," Elena said. She looked at the screen, then back at Jordan. She realized she didn't want to leave. Not yet. She wanted to stay here, in this space, with this person, and just breathe in the possibility of what they had created. "Do you ever think about it?" Elena asked, her voice quiet. "About how we got here? From two people who barely spoke in the hallway to this." Jordan laughed, a light, airy sound that filled the room. "I think about it all the time. I think about how much time we wasted. How many arguments we could have avoided if we'd just looked at each other and realized we were actually saying the same thing in different languages." "Different languages," Elena echoed. "You're the experimentalist. I'm the theorist. It makes sense that we'd have trouble communicating." "But we learned," Jordan said, taking Elena's hand, her fingers interlacing with hers, a firm, grounding pressure. "We learned to translate. We learned to adapt. And we learned to collaborate. That's the most important thing I've ever done." She leaned in, her lips finding Elena's in a kiss that was slow, deep, and filled with a quiet, persistent promise. It wasn't the frantic, desperate kiss of the early days, nor the celebratory, triumphant kiss of the symposium. It was a kiss of commitment, a quiet, steady acknowledgement that they were here, they were together, and they were in this for the long haul. When they finally pulled apart, Elena felt a sense of peace she had never known. She was no longer trying to solve for X. She was no longer looking for the perfect, sterile solution. She was content to live in the middle of the variable, held firmly by the hand of the woman who had turned her entire world into a beautiful, chaotic, and perfectly calibrated mess. "Let's go home," Jordan whispered, her eyes dark and intense. "Let's go home," Elena repeated. They stood up, gathering their things, the lab feeling less like a clinical environment and more like a workshop, a place where they would build the future, brick by brick, equation by equation. As they walked toward the door, Elena paused, looking back at the server racks, the console, the whiteboard covered in their work. It was just a room, just equipment, but it was where they had found each other. It was where the reaction had started, and it would always be a part of their history. They stepped out into the hallway, the cool, air-conditioned air washing over them. They walked toward the exit, their shoulders bumping, their presence a comfortable, grounding weight. The night was theirs. The future was theirs. And for the first time in her life, Elena didn't feel the need to calculate the outcome. She knew it. She felt it. It was the only thing that was real. They stepped out into the night, the city lights shimmering in the distance, a sprawling, complex, and beautiful network of possibilities. The air was crisp, the sky clear, the stars bright and distant. They walked, not toward the dorms, but toward the park, the same place they had gone after the symposium, a place that felt like their own private sanctuary. The city hummed around them, a distant, rhythmic reminder of the world they were navigating, but here, under the canopy of the trees, everything was quiet. They walked in silence for a while, their hands still linked, their presence a comfortable, grounding weight. Every so often, their shoulders would brush, a casual, electric touch that sent a jolt of warmth through Elena's veins. It was a silent conversation, a language they had developed over the last few weeks, a shorthand of glances, touches, and shared breaths that spoke volumes more than words ever could. As they reached the center of the park, a small, secluded glade lit by the soft, silvery light of the moon, Jordan stopped. She turned to face Elena, her expression changing, the teasing, the sarcasm, the bravado, it all fell away, leaving behind a raw, intense focus that made Elena's breath catch in her throat. "You know," Jordan said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I used to be afraid of the static. I used to be afraid that if I stopped moving, if I stopped pushing, the energy would just dissipate. And now?" Elena asked, her voice barely audible. "Now," Jordan murmured, stepping into her personal space, "I know that as long as I'm with you, I don't have to push. I don't have to keep the system running. I can just be." She reached out, her fingers cupping Elena's jaw, her thumb brushing against her cheekbone. Elena leaned into the touch, a natural, reflexive motion that made her heart ache with a sudden, overwhelming sense of belonging. "I spent so long looking for the answer," Elena whispered. "The one, true, undeniable proof." "And?" Jordan asked, squeezing her hand. "And I think I've found it," Elena said, looking directly at her. "It's not in the data. It's not in the grant. It's not in the research. Where is it?" Elena smiled, leaning in to press a soft, lingering kiss to Jordan's cheek. "It's in the connection. It's in the symmetry." Jordan looked at her, her expression soft, vulnerable, and completely unguarded. "I think you're right, Miller. I think you're finally right." They stood there for a long time, held together in the quiet heart of the park, the silence a stark, peaceful contrast to the storm of words and ideas that had filled their day. When they finally pulled apart, the air in the park felt different, softer, warmer, charged with a new, quiet certainty. "What happens now?" Elena asked, her voice breathless, her eyes searching Jordan's. "What do you want to happen?" "I want to build that lab," Elena said, her voice strong, her resolve clear. "I want to take that research and turn it into something real. Something that matters." "Then that's what we'll do," Jordan said, her voice steady and sure. "We'll pitch it. We'll get the funding. We'll set up the lab. We'll do the work. And we'll do it together." She leaned in, her lips finding Elena's in a kiss that was both a reassurance and a challenge. It was a kiss that tasted of future possibilities, of shared late nights and early mornings, of arguments and resolutions, of a life being built, experiment by experiment, together. In the quiet, moonlit glade, suspended between the earth and the sky, Elena realized that the fear was gone. The chaos wasn't something to be managed anymore, it was something to be embraced. The uncertainty wasn't a threat, it was the space where they were going to create something new. She wasn't just a theorist, and Jordan wasn't just an experimentalist. They were partners, in the deepest, most complex, and most beautiful sense of the word. "Okay," Elena whispered against Jordan's lips, a smile blooming in the dark. "Let's iterate." Jordan laughed, the sound bright and hopeful, and pulled her closer. Outside, the night continued, indifferent to their quiet, private revolution. But in the park, under the gaze of a million distant stars, a new reaction was beginning, one that would be, by all accounts, highly volatile, incredibly energetic, and entirely perfect. The night stretched on, a canvas for their potential. They stood there for a long time, simply existing in the presence of one another, the silence comfortable and thick with unspoken promises. There was so much they didn't know, what the future would bring, how they would handle the challenges, where the research would lead. But as Jordan's hand traced the arc of her spine, and as Elena felt the steady, reassuring warmth of her presence, she knew one thing for certain: whatever the future held, they were going to meet it with the same precision, the same passion, and the same unyielding belief in the validity of their shared experiment. The variables were defined. The foundation was set. And as the first hint of pre-dawn grey began to touch the eastern horizon, Elena realized that she didn't just understand the physics of attraction anymore. She was living it. Every look, every touch, every shared laugh was a testament to the fact that they were perfectly aligned. She was no longer the girl who needed to control every outcome. She was the girl who had found, in the most unlikely of places, her perfect, beautiful, and delightfully unpredictable variable. "Ready?" Jordan whispered, her eyes dark and intense as the sky began to lighten. "Ready," Elena replied, her voice strong. And together, they turned away from the park, away from the quiet, dark refuge of the glade, and walked back toward the campus, back toward the heart of the building, and back into the heart of everything they were building, one deliberate, perfect step at a time. The future was waiting. The world was waiting. And they were ready to show it exactly what happened when two forces, as disparate and powerful as them, finally found their perfect, symmetric, and undeniable balance. The morning light began to climb higher, catching the edges of the buildings, casting a soft, golden hue over the campus. It was a new day, a new beginning, and as they walked, hand in hand, the path ahead seemed clear, open, and infinite. They were the architects of their own future, the designers of their own destiny, and together, there was no variable they couldn't solve, no equation they couldn't balance, and no limit to what they could achieve. The experiment was just beginning. And as Elena looked at Jordan, at the messy hair, the sharp, intelligent eyes, and the smirk that had defined her entire world, she knew that she wouldn't have it any other way. "Next experiment?" Jordan asked, her voice teasing but soft. Elena looked up, her glasses slightly askew, her hair a mess, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked at Jordan, the woman who had shattered her walls, who had forced her to see the world in a different, more vibrant spectrum, and felt a wave of confidence she hadn't known she possessed. "Next experiment," Elena agreed. "But this time, I'm setting the parameters." Jordan grinned, a look of pure, unadulterated delight. "I can't wait." As they reached the edge of the campus, the buildings standing tall and imposing in the morning light, Elena took a deep breath. She felt the weight of her bag, the familiar, grounding presence of her research, but more than that, she felt the warmth of Jordan's hand in hers. They weren't just colleagues. They weren't just rivals. They were something else entirely, a new, hybrid form of connection, a synthesis that defied the rules and created its own, beautiful, and enduring pattern. They walked into the lobby of their department, the automatic doors sliding open with a soft, mechanical hiss. The world was waking up, the campus was filling with life, but for the two of them, everything had narrowed down to this moment, this place, and this partnership. The pitch was only days away. The proposal would be intense, the scrutiny sharp, the pressure mounting with every tick of the clock. But as Elena glanced at Jordan, she knew they were prepared. They had the data, they had the theory, and most importantly, they had each other. And that, she realized with a jolt of pure, unadulterated clarity, was the most important discovery of all. The experiment was not just a success, it was a breakthrough. And they weren't just getting started. The reception stretched out before them, an endless, golden opportunity to celebrate, to breathe, and to be. And as they stepped into the crowd of the academic building, ready to face the day, Elena knew that no matter where the future led, no matter the pitches, the grants, or the academic careers, they would always be, in the most important way, perfectly, inevitably, aligned. She took a breath, letting the thrill of the victory wash over her, and then, with a confident, steady step, she walked into the rest of their lives. The variables were defined. The foundation was set. And as the day finally came to an end, casting the campus in the long, soft shadows of evening, Elena realized that she didn't just understand the physics of attraction anymore. She was living it. Every look, every touch, every shared laugh was a testament to the fact that they were perfectly aligned. She was no longer the girl who needed to control every outcome. She was the girl who had found, in the most unlikely of places, her perfect, beautiful, and delightfully unpredictable variable. And as they stood in the center of their research office, the silence ringing out around them, they looked at each other, a quiet, secret communication that said everything that needed to be said. They had made it. They had proven the theory. And they had, in the process, created something that was, by all accounts, highly volatile, incredibly energetic, and entirely perfect. The experiment was a success. The variables were solved. And the next chapter? Well, the next chapter was theirs to write, one variable at a time. The lights dimmed, the city hummed, and for a moment, in the middle of the crowded university, Elena and Jordan stood in a small, quiet island of their own making. To the experiment, Jordan whispered, raising a mug of coffee. Elena clinked her mug against Jordan's, a clear, ringing sound that felt like a bell marking the start of a new era. To the experiment, Elena agreed. And as they turned back to the crowd, the world, and the future, they did so as a unit, a team, a partnership, and a bond that nothing, not even the most complex of variables, could ever hope to break. The story, they both knew, was just starting, and it was going to be a masterpiece. The friction, the attraction, the unpredictability, it was all there, waiting for them, an endless, evolving, and beautifully complex loop. They walked, they laughed, they talked, and they existed, a singular, powerful force in the middle of an academic world that was just beginning to understand the magnitude of what they had just created. The night was theirs. The future was theirs. And for the first time in her life, Elena was content to simply exist in the middle of the variable, held firmly by the hand of the woman who had turned her entire world into a beautiful, chaotic, and perfectly calibrated mess. And as the last of the students filtered out, the hall falling into the quiet, cool silence of the night, they were finally, truly, alone. Ready? Jordan asked, her eyes dark, her voice low. Elena looked at her, at the woman who had challenged her, inspired her, and ultimately, completed her. She saw the potential, the possibility, and the promise of everything that was to come. Ready, Elena said, her voice steady and sure. And together, they walked out of the building, out into the cool, star-filled night, ready to begin the next, most exciting phase of their experiment. The experiment was just getting started. And they were, in every way that mattered, exactly where they were supposed to be. The symposium was over, the work was done, the thesis was proven, and the results were in. They were, unequivocally, undeniably, and perfectly, a match. The future was bright, the variables were solved, and the experiment was, by all measures, a massive, resounding, and beautiful success. They were, and they would always be, the perfect reaction. The transition from the academic cocoon of the university to the sharp, unforgiving reality of the private sector was not a gentle slope, it was a cliff face. 3 weeks post-symposium, the quiet, golden haze of Jordan's apartment had been replaced by the frantic, caffeinated hum of a makeshift office, which was, in actuality, the living room converted into a war room of whiteboards, server towers, and stacks of legal documents. Elena was currently staring at a projection on the wall, her brow furrowed, a highlighter clutched in her hand like a weapon. The document was a term sheet from a venture capital firm in Cambridge. It was beautiful, terrifying, and the most dangerous variable she had ever encountered. "You're doing that thing again," Jordan said from the corner of the room. She was sprawled on the floor, surrounded by a tangle of Ethernet cables and hardware components, her soldering iron resting on a stand. She didn't look up, but her tone was amused. "I'm going to calculate the probability of our total financial ruin, face. It's not a good look, Miller. It's entirely too serious for a Tuesday." Elena dropped the highlighter and rubbed her eyes. "It's not just financial ruin, Jordan. It's autonomy. If we sign this, we have partners. We have oversight. We have to report to people who understand balance sheets better than they understand quantum thermodynamics." Jordan sighed, setting the soldering iron down. She stood up, stretching, her movements loose and feline. She walked across the room, her presence instantly shifting the center of gravity. She stood behind Elena, resting her chin on Elena's shoulder, her arms wrapping around her waist. The contact was an immediate, grounding weight that cut through Elena's stress. "We have oversight because we need the capital," Jordan murmured against her ear. "Unless you've been hiding a secret inheritance, we can't build a quantum-stable generator on coffee money and hope. We need the infrastructure." "I know," Elena said, leaning back into her. The scent of ozone and cedarwood that always clung to Jordan was a balm to her frayed nerves. "It's just the compromise. I hate the idea of compromising the research to satisfy an investor's quarterly expectations." Jordan tightened her hold, her hands tracing the line of Elena's ribs. "Who says we're compromising? We're the ones with the IP, Elena. We're the ones who solve the coherence decay. They need us more than we need their spreadsheets. We hold the leverage." "You're always so confident in the leverage," Elena said, a smile pulling at her lips. "That's why you have me," Jordan countered, turning Elena around to face her. Her expression was serious, her amber eyes locking onto Elena's. "I deal with the chaotic variables. You handle the structural integrity. We've proven we can handle the board. We can handle a few venture capitalists." Elena looked at her, really looked at her. The last few weeks had been a blur of meetings, pitch decks, and sleepless nights, but through it all, they had become an inseparable unit. The friction that had once fueled their rivalry had transmuted into a powerful, synchronized energy. They were a closed loop of support, strategy, and affection. "Okay," Elena said, the knot of anxiety in her stomach finally beginning to loosen. "But you're the one who has to talk about the budget projections. My brain refuses to reconcile the math with the imaginary marketing costs they keep asking for." "Deal," Jordan said, a grin spreading across her face. I'll dazzle them with the projections, and you'll stun them with the physics. We'll have them eating out of the palm of our hands by lunch. Their meeting was with a firm in Kendall Square, the heart of the tech corridor. The office was all glass, steel, and high-end minimalism, designed to intimidate people who didn't know their worth. Elena walked in, her suit sharp and professional, her glasses serving as a barrier between her and the overly bright sunlight. Jordan was in her usual gear, a high-quality dark blazer over a simple tee, her hair pulled back, looking like she owned the building. The lead investor, a man named Arthur Vance, no relation, thankfully, Jordan had quipped earlier, was a legend in the field. He had a reputation for cutting startups down to size before they even finished their opening slide. He sat at the head of the mahogany table, his gaze cool, appraising. You two are the team from the symposium. The coherence loop. Very impressive, on paper. But academic success doesn't always translate to the market. Why should I trust that you can scale this? Elena stepped forward, her nerves replaced by the familiar, cold clarity of a physics problem. She didn't look at Jordan, she didn't need to. She knew Jordan was right there, the support, the energy, the unspoken backup. We aren't asking you to trust us to scale it, Mr. Vance, Elena said, her voice steady, precise. We're asking you to provide the environment where the scalability is a mathematical certainty. The physics isn't an approximation. It's an absolute. The barrier to entry isn't the technology, it's the application. We've already done the hard part. Vance raised an eyebrow. And the easy part? Making it cost-effective. Jordan stepped into the space, her voice relaxed, confident, and utterly charming. That's the beauty of it. The thermal variance, the one everyone else has been trying to suppress, we're using it as a secondary power input. We're not fighting the thermodynamics, Mr. Vance. We're letting the system work with them. It's more efficient, more durable, and fundamentally cheaper to produce than anything currently on the market. She pulled up a slide, a schematic that looked like a piece of modern art. We aren't just selling a generator. We're selling a fundamental shift in how we handle energy density. We're the new baseline. The room went silent. Vance studied the schematic for a long, agonizing minute. Elena held her breath, her heart hammering. This was the moment. The culmination of months of friction, of late nights, of the transition from rival to partner. Vance leaned back, a slow, grudging smile spreading across his face. You two are remarkably arrogant for people who haven't filed a patent yet. We're not arrogant, Jordan said, her voice smooth. We're just the only ones who have actually solved the equation. Vance chuckled. It was a dry, brittle sound, but it was the sound of a concession. All right. Let's talk numbers. The rest of the hour was a blur. They navigated the questions with a precision that bordered on telepathic. When Vance pushed, Jordan absorbed the impact. When he doubted, Elena provided the proof. They were a machine, a perfectly tuned, high-functioning reaction. When they walked out of the office building and onto the sidewalk, the air felt different. It was the same city, the same afternoon, but the atmosphere had shifted. They hadn't signed anything yet, the lawyers would spend weeks picking apart the term sheet, but they had won. They had the interest. They had the momentum. Elena stopped on the sidewalk, the adrenaline finally cresting and receding, leaving her breathless. We did it, she whispered, looking at the glass tower above them. Jordan stood beside her, her hands in her pockets, a triumphant, wild grin on her face. We did. We actually did it. She didn't wait. She turned, grabbed Elena by the shoulders, and pulled her into a kiss that was unapologetic, public, and fierce. It was the kiss of two people who had just conquered the world, or at least, their small, intense corner of it. Passers-by hurried past, students, professionals, people living their own lives, but in that moment, the sidewalk felt like the center of the universe. When they broke apart, breathless, Jordan's eyes were dark, alive with a kind of electric joy that made Elena's heart ache. Lunch, Jordan declared, her voice rough. The most expensive lunch in the city. My treat. Well, technically the company's future capital, but we're celebrating. I thought you said we had to be prudent with our runway, Elena teased, smoothing her hair. We're celebrating the beginning of the end of our financial struggles, Jordan said, taking Elena's hand and pulling her toward a bustling bistro down the block. Besides, you deserve it. You were absolute fire in there. I was just stating the facts. You were a queen, Jordan corrected, her voice dropping to that intimate, private register. And I'm going to make sure you know exactly how impressive you were. They found a table in the corner of the bistro, a place that felt far removed from the cold, steel and glass reality of the VC office. They ordered wine, they ordered the best food on the menu, and they sat, knees touching beneath the table, the energy between them shifting from the professional to the deeply, undeniably personal. The lunch was a blur of laughter, of post-mortem analysis of the pitch, and of a shared, quiet recognition of the path they were walking. What now? Elena asked, swirling the wine in her glass. Now? Jordan leaned in, her gaze intense, her thumb grazing the back of Elena's hand. Now we start the actual work. We hire a team. We find a space. We build the prototype. We stop being theorists and start being industry disruptors. It sounds exhausting, Elena said, though there was no doubt in her voice. It's going to be the most exhausting, difficult, and exhilarating thing we've ever done, Jordan agreed. And I wouldn't do it with anyone else. She reached out, her hand finding Elena's, their fingers interlacing. The contact was solid, grounded, and real. The chaos of the morning had settled into something promising, a new, undiscovered space for them to explore. I know, Elena said, her voice soft. And, Jordan added, her smirk returning, we're going to have to find a better place to hold our strategy meetings than the living room floor. Elena laughed, the sound bright and hopeful. I think that's a top priority. They finished their lunch, the world around them continuing its relentless, frantic pace, but for the two of them, everything felt still. They were in the eye of the storm, a space of perfect calm and absolute focus, surrounded by the energy they were currently in the process of harnessing. As they left the bistro, the sun was beginning to dip, casting long, golden shadows across the street. The air was cooling, the city lights beginning to blink to life, a sprawling, complex network of energy. Where to? Elena asked. Back to the lab, Jordan said, her eyes gleaming. We have a generator to build. They walked back toward the university, their steps falling into a synchronized, easy rhythm. The university campus was changing, the leaves were turning, the air was sharper, the sense of an ending and a beginning was everywhere. But for them, the timing was perfect. They reached the annex, the familiar, humming building that had been the site of their first collision, their first breakthrough, and their first real connection. Wait, Elena said, stopping by the door. She looked at Jordan, at the woman who had become her partner, her collaborator, and her constant. Before we go back in, thank you. Jordan paused, her expression softening. For what? For seeing me, Elena said, her voice steady. For not just seeing the theorist, or the student, or the rival. For seeing me. Jordan didn't speak. She just moved, quick, graceful step, and took Elena's face in her hands. She leaned in, her forehead pressing against Elena's, their breath mingling in the cool, crisp air. I see everything, Jordan whispered. Every part of you. And it's the only thing that makes sense to me. She kissed her then, a soft, slow, and deeply sincere kiss that felt like a promise. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a seal, a confirmation, a testament to the fact that they were exactly where they were meant to be. When they pulled apart, the world seemed to have realigned. The buildings, the trees, the lights, everything was in its right place, centered around the connection they shared. Let's go, Jordan said, her voice low. They walked into the lab, the cold, sterile air hitting them like an old friend. They didn't head for the main workstations, but for their private alcove, a space they had carved out for themselves, filled with their notes, their prototypes, and the hum of their own, private, perfect frequency. The lab was quiet, save for the hum of the pumps and the rhythmic ticking of the clock. They moved to the workbench, their work already laid out, waiting for them. The feedback loop, Elena said, pulling up the simulation on the monitor. If we adjust the frequency to 50 Hz, the resonance should stabilize. Jordan leaned over her shoulder, her hand resting on the console, her presence a steady, warm weight. And the dissipation. It's contained, Elena said, her fingers dancing over the keys. It's a closed-loop system now. It's perfect. They worked for hours, the world outside the lab ceasing to exist. They were a single, high-functioning unit, their minds weaving together in a dance of theory and experimentation, of calculation and intuition. Every point of disagreement was met with a compromise that felt better than the original idea. Every challenge was an opportunity to iterate, to refine, to improve. They weren't just working, they were creating. Around midnight, the lab quieted, the other students long gone. The blue light of the terminals cast long, soft shadows across the floor. They were alone in the sanctuary of their research, two figures in the glow of their own creation. We need a name, Elena said, looking up from the monitor. For the startup. Something distinctive. Jordan sat back on her heels, thinking. She looked around the lab, at the equipment, the wires, the screens, then back at Elena. Friction, Jordan said. Friction. Elena repeated, a smile forming. We're going to call our company Friction. Think about it, Jordan said, her eyes gleaming. We create energy through friction. We're the spark. And it's how we started. It's the story of us. Elena looked at the name, the concept, the history. It was bold, it was honest, and it was perfect. Friction, Elena agreed. I like it. Jordan smiled, a look of pure, unadulterated delight. Then it settled. They sat in the quiet of the lab, their name hanging in the air like a promise. They were no longer just a theorist and an experimentalist. They were the co-founders of Friction. They were the architects of their own future. Ready to test it? Elena asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. Jordan took her hand, her fingers interlacing with hers, a firm, grounding pressure. Ready, Jordan said, her voice steady and sure. And together, they initiated the sequence. The machine hummed, a low, steady sound that built, increased, and then stabilized into a perfect, resonant tone. The data on the screen flashed, the numbers climbing, the graph smoothing into a beautiful, unbroken line. It worked. They stood in the glow of the monitor, watching the success, their hands still linked, their eyes locked on each other. They had done it. They had solved the variable. They had created the spark. And as the lab hummed with the sound of their success, Elena knew that this was only the beginning. The experiment was far from over. In fact, it was just getting started. Next experiment? Jordan asked, her voice teasing but soft. Elena looked up, her glasses slightly askew, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked at Jordan, the woman who had shattered her walls, who had forced her to see the world in a different, more vibrant spectrum, and felt a wave of confidence she hadn't known she possessed. Next experiment, Elena agreed. But this time, I'm setting the parameters. Jordan grinned, a look of pure, unadulterated delight. I can't wait. They stood there, two figures connected by a thread of pure, unadulterated potential, waiting for the rest of their lives to begin. The experiment was ongoing. The results were unknown. But as Elena looked at the screen, then at Jordan, she knew that whatever happened next, whatever variables were introduced, whatever challenges they faced, it would be the most significant breakthrough of her life. The lab was quiet, the world was sleeping, and they were, together, exactly where they were supposed to be. Everything was in equilibrium. And it was, quite simply, beautiful.